Welcome to Moonlight Temple, your sanctuary for ancient wisdom and inner peace. Over the next 3 hours, you'll embark on a transformative journey through timeless Buddhist teachings that have guided seekers for over 2,500 years. These aren't just stories, they're keys to unlock profound changes in how you experience life, handle challenges, and find lasting peace within yourself. Whether you're seeking better sleep, stress relief, or deeper meaning, these ancient tales speak directly to the modern heart. Each story carries medicine for the soul, wisdom that transforms ordinary moments into opportunities for growth. So find your most comfortable position, close your eyes if you wish, and let these gentle teachings wash over you like moonlight on still water. The impossible choice. In a time when the world moves faster than ever, there lived a wealthy merchant who possessed everything one could desire. Grand houses filled with treasures, fertile lands stretching beyond the horizon, and most precious of all, 3 young children whose laughter filled his days with joy. Yet, like many of us, this father found himself constantly pulled away by the demands of his work, always chasing the next achievement. One afternoon, while the merchant was away attending to business matters, disaster struck his home. A terrible fire erupted, spreading with frightening speed through the wooden structure. When word reached the merchant, his heart nearly stopped. He raced home, finding the house completely engulfed in flames. But what horrified him most was the sight of his 3 children still inside, playing with their toys, completely oblivious to the danger surrounding them. "Children, come out immediately!" the father shouted with all his strength. "The house is on fire. You must leave now." But his desperate cries fell on deaf ears. The children, enchanted by their playthings, simply couldn't comprehend the urgency in his voice. Each second that passed felt like an eternity to the anguished parent. Realizing that direct warnings weren't enough, the clever father remembered something that never failed to capture his children's attention. With wisdom born from love, he called out in an excited voice, "Children, I have something wonderful waiting for you outside. There are beautiful toy carts here, magnificent goat carts, elegant deer carts, and powerful ox carts. Come quickly and choose whichever one captures your heart." The effect was immediate and magical. The children's eyes lit up with wonder and excitement. They dropped their toys and raced toward the door, their hearts pounding with anticipation rather than fear. In moments, they were safely outside, breathing fresh air and looking around eagerly for the promised treasures. "Father, where are the carts you promised?" the youngest child asked. The merchant smiled, his heart overflowing with gratitude. From behind the house, he brought forth a single cart, but what a cart it was! This wasn't just any ordinary toy. It was crafted from the finest materials, adorned with precious jewels, and decorated with silk that felt like clouds. It was more magnificent than anything he had described, surpassing even their wildest dreams. When Buddha shared this parable, he revealed something profound about human nature. The burning house represents our everyday suffering, the stress, anxiety, and endless dissatisfaction that consume our peace. Most of us, like the children, remain unaware of the dangers surrounding us. We become so absorbed in temporary pleasures that we cannot see how our attachments slowly burn away, our happiness. Modern neuroscience confirms what Buddha taught. Our brains are wired to seek immediate gratification, often missing long-term consequences. The loving Father represents wise guidance, whether from teachers, books, or our own inner wisdom. Sometimes direct warnings about life's dangers aren't enough to motivate change. So wisdom uses skillful means, meeting us where we are, speaking in ways that resonate with our current understanding. The various carts represent different practices that help us grow, but the magnificent final cart represents something extraordinary, the discovery that peace was always available, more beautiful than we ever imagined. Right now, take a gentle breath and notice what's happening in your body. Ask yourself, what burning house am I living in today? Perhaps it's a toxic relationship, a stressful job, or endless scrolling through social media. Don't judge yourself. Simply observe with compassion. Here's your practice for this week. Each morning, spend 30 seconds asking yourself, what am I so absorbed in that I'm missing the bigger picture? Then take 3 conscious breaths, like stepping outside the burning house of unconscious living. Notice how this simple pause shifts your entire day. You're not trying to fix anything. You're simply developing the awareness to see clearly. This ancient story speaks directly to our modern predicament. We chase external achievements, the next promotion, relationship, or purchase, believing they'll bring lasting satisfaction. But like the children's toys, these pleasures are temporary distractions from deeper fulfillment. The Father's lie wasn't deception. It was compassionate guidance towards something infinitely more valuable. When you feel trapped in cycles of wanting and disappointment, remember the magnificent cart. True contentment isn't found in getting what you think you want, but in discovering the peace that was always available within you. The burning house of modern life, with its endless notifications, pressures, and distractions, cannot touch the sanctuary of awareness you carry everywhere. Tonight, as you rest in the gentle rhythm of your breath, consider that perhaps the escape you seek isn't to a different life, but to a different way of seeing the life you already have. The sound that changed everything. In a tranquil monastery, nestled among whispering bamboo groves, there lived a young monk whose heart burned with frustration. Day after day, he watched his fellow brothers in their spiritual practices, and instead of finding peace, he found himself consumed by irritation. Some monks moved too slowly during walking meditation, others chanted off-key during evening prayers, and still others seemed to lack the dedication he believed was necessary for true enlightenment. His mind had become a battlefield where judgment and anger waged constant war against his desire for inner peace. This wasn't a casual spiritual seeker. This young monk had entered the monastery with the purest intentions, genuinely wanting to become enlightened. Yet here he was, more agitated than ever, caught in a web of expectations and disappointments that seemed to tighten with each passing day. The very people who were supposed to be his spiritual companions had become sources of endless annoyance. One particularly difficult evening, after a meditation session where his mind had been anything but quiet, the young monk could contain his frustration no longer. He approached Buddha, who was sitting peacefully beneath an ancient Bodhi tree. The moonlight filtered through the leaves, creating patterns of light and shadow that danced across the master's serene face. Even in the presence of such profound tranquility, the young monk's agitation was palpable. "Master," he began, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion, "I don't understand what's happening to me. I came here seeking peace, yet I find myself constantly irritated by my fellow monks. Their laziness disturbs me, their lack of focus frustrates me, and their casual attitude toward practice makes my blood boil. How can I cultivate patience when everything around me seems designed to test my limits?" Buddha listened with the complete attention that only true compassion can provide. His eyes held no judgment, no impatience with this familiar human struggle. When the young monk finished speaking, Buddha smiled gently and gestured for him to sit. "Let me share with you a story about two monks who lived right here in this very bamboo grove. The first monk was earnest and dedicated, much like yourself. He rose before dawn for meditation, studied the teachings with intense focus, and approached every aspect of spiritual practice with unwavering determination. His intentions were pure, his effort genuine, yet he struggled constantly with frustration toward those who didn't match his level of commitment. The second monk was naturally calm and patient, understanding something profound about the nature of practice that his companion had not yet grasped. One windy evening, a powerful storm swept through the bamboo grove. The wind howled through the trees, causing the bamboo stalks to creak and sway dramatically. The rustling leaves created a constant, loud symphony that made traditional meditation seem nearly impossible. For the impatient monk, this was the final straw in what had already been a challenging day. He sat in his meditation posture, but instead of finding stillness, he found only agitation. Every rustle of the bamboo leaves felt like a personal attack on his practice. Every creak of the swaying stalks seemed to mock his efforts to find inner quiet. His jaw clenched, his shoulders tensed, and his mind filled with angry thoughts about how unfair it was that nature itself seemed to conspire against his spiritual progress. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, he stood up in frustration. "This is impossible," he declared to his companion. "How can anyone meditate with all this noise? The wind is too strong, the bamboo too loud. I'm going to find somewhere quieter to practice. This grove has become completely unsuitable for serious meditation." The patient monk, who had been sitting in perfect stillness throughout the storm, opened his eyes, slowly. His face showed no trace of the agitation that consumed his friend. Instead, there was a gentle smile playing at the corners of his mouth, the expression of someone who had just discovered something beautiful. When he spoke, his voice was as calm as still water. "My friend," he said softly, "I hear the same wind you hear, the same rustling bamboo. But I've learnt something important. We don't control the wind. We can't command the bamboo to be silent. What we can control is our response to what we cannot change. The sound becomes a disturbance only when I decide to let it disturb me. Listen more carefully, he continued, his words flowing like honey. The bamboo doesn't fight the wind, it bends and sways, dancing with the storm rather than resisting it. In its flexibility, it finds strength. In its acceptance of the wind's power, it discovers grace. The same wind that agitates you has become music to me because I've learned to move with it rather than against it. Patience isn't about waiting for perfect conditions or hoping that other people will change to meet our expectations. True patience is the art of finding peace within chaos, stillness within movement, calm within the storm. When we cultivate this inner flexibility, we become like the bamboo, able to bend without breaking, to remain rooted while adapting to whatever conditions arise. This is what transforms ordinary moments into opportunities for profound wisdom. Buddha paused in his storytelling, allowing the young monk to absorb these insights. The night air was filled with its own gentle sounds, crickets singing, leaves whispering, the distant flow of a stream. These sounds, which might have once seemed like distractions, now felt like part of a larger symphony of existence. Modern neuroscience reveals something fascinating about patience. When we resist what's happening, our stress hormones spike, and our prefrontal cortex, the brain's wisdom center, goes offline. But when we practice acceptance, our nervous system naturally calms, and we access higher levels of creativity and insight. The bamboo teaches us what researchers now call cognitive flexibility, the ability to adapt our thinking when circumstances change. Right now, as you listen to these words, notice any sounds around you. Perhaps there's traffic outside, someone moving in another room, or the hum of electronics. Instead of trying to block these sounds out, can you welcome them as part of this moment? Feel how this simple shift from resistance to acceptance changes your entire experience. Here's your bamboo practice for the coming week. Each time you feel irritated by someone's behavior, whether it's a slow driver, a chatty coworker, or a family member who doesn't do things your way, pause and ask yourself, how can I bend like bamboo in this moment? Take 3 conscious breaths and imagine yourself swaying with the wind of circumstances rather than fighting against it. Notice how this mental shift transforms both your stress level and your relationships. The young monk felt something profound shift within his heart. It was as if a tight knot of frustration had suddenly loosened, allowing space for something gentler to emerge. He realized that his agitation with others had been a reflection of his own inner rigidity, his unwillingness to accept the natural diversity of human temperaments. In demanding that others conform to his expectations, he had created his own suffering. From that night forward, the young monk approached his practice with completely different energy. When a fellow monk moved slowly, he saw an opportunity to practice patience. When someone chanted off-key, he heard a chance to find harmony within discord. When others seemed less dedicated, he discovered that true dedication meant accepting people exactly as they were, while continuing his own sincere practice. He had learnt to bend like bamboo, finding strength in flexibility and peace in acceptance. This ancient wisdom speaks powerfully to our hyper-connected world. We're constantly surrounded by people who don't share our values, work at our pace, or see things our way. Social media amplifies every difference of opinion. Traffic tests our patience daily, and even our loved ones can trigger our need for control. But what if, like the bamboo, we could learn to bend rather than break? True patience isn't passive resignation or weak acceptance of harmful behavior. It's the courageous choice to remain centered and peaceful while responding wisely to whatever life presents. It's understanding that our inner state doesn't have to be dictated by external circumstances. When we cultivate this bamboo-like flexibility, we discover that patience itself becomes a source of strength, allowing us to navigate life's storms with grace and wisdom. Tonight, as you rest in the gentle rhythm of your breath, consider where in your life you might be fighting against winds you cannot control. What would it feel like to bend instead of breaking, to flow instead of resisting? Perhaps, like the bamboo in the grove, you too can find your own way of dancing with life's inevitable challenges, discovering that true strength often lies not in rigid resistance, but in graceful adaptability. The search that led nowhere. In the misty mountains where ancient pines whispered secrets to the morning fog, there lived a young monk whose heart ached with a longing he couldn't quite name. For 3 years, he had devoted himself completely to meditation, study, and spiritual practice. Yet despite his unwavering dedication, he felt as though he were chasing shadows. Each day seemed to take him further from the enlightenment he sought so desperately. This wasn't a casual spiritual seeker. This young monk had sacrificed everything for his spiritual quest, leaving behind comfort, family, and career to pursue the deepest truths of existence. His commitment was absolute, his effort genuine, yet he found himself trapped in a cycle of striving that generated more frustration than peace. The harder he tried, the more elusive his goal became. One crisp autumn morning, when his frustration had reached a breaking point, the young monk approached his master with trembling hands. "Master," he began, his words tumbling out in anguish, "I've been practicing for years with complete dedication. I meditate for hours, study every teaching, follow every instruction. Yet I feel further from enlightenment now than when I first arrived. What am I doing wrong?" The master looked up from his gardening, his weathered face showing gentle warmth. He gestured for the young monk to sit beside him on a weathered stone bench. "Let me tell you a story about a farmer who loved his ox more than anything else in the world. This farmer lived in a small village where his ox was not just a working animal, but his closest companion. Together, they had plowed countless fields and weathered many storms. The ox was strong and gentle, with wise eyes that seemed to understand the farmer's heart. In the evenings, the farmer would sit beside his faithful friend, feeling a peace that transcended words. One morning, the farmer woke to discover that his beloved ox had wandered away during the night. His heart filled with panic and grief, For without his ox, he felt incomplete, as though a part of his very soul had disappeared. He couldn't imagine life without his faithful companion. Immediately, the farmer began searching with desperate intensity. He called the ox's name until his voice grew hoarse, combed through nearby fields until his feet were bleeding. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, yet still he searched with unwavering determination. His fields went unplanted, his house fell into disrepair, but nothing mattered except finding what he had lost. One day, after months of fruitless searching, the exhausted farmer discovered fresh tracks at the edge of a dense forest. His heart leaped with joy, finally a real clue. These weren't just any tracks, they had the familiar gait he knew so well. With trembling excitement, he began following the trail deeper into the forest. The journey was arduous. The tracks led him through thick underbrush, across rushing streams, and up steep mountainsides. Sometimes the trail was clear, other times it disappeared, forcing him to search carefully among rocks and fallen leaves. Yet he persevered, driven by certainty that each step brought him closer to his lost companion. Finally, after following the trail for many days, the farmer emerged into a beautiful mountain meadow. There, grazing peacefully in the afternoon sunlight, was his ox. The animal looked up at his approach, and in its gentle eyes, the farmer saw the same wisdom and affection that had always been there. It was as if no time had passed at all. But as he drew closer, something profound began to dawn on him. The ox looked exactly the same, as always, strong, gentle, peaceful. It hadn't been lost or suffering during their separation. In fact, it seemed to radiate the same quiet contentment it had always possessed. The farmer realized that his beloved companion had never really been lost at all. As this understanding settled into his heart, an even deeper realization emerged. The desperate, frantic energy that had driven his search slowly dissolved, replaced by a profound sense of coming home. He sat down in the meadow beside his ox, feeling a peace deeper than any he had known before. It wasn't just that he had found his lost companion, he had rediscovered something within himself that had never actually been missing. The master paused, allowing the young monk to absorb the meaning. Modern psychology calls this the hedonic treadmill, our tendency to believe happiness lies in the next achievement, relationship, or experience. We exhaust ourselves chasing external goals, not realizing that contentment was always available in the present moment. Neuroscientists have discovered that our brains are naturally wired for seeking, but true fulfillment comes from learning to rest in being. This ox represents your true nature, your inherent peace, wisdom, and completeness, the master continued softly. At the beginning of your spiritual journey, you felt like something precious was missing. So you began searching with great intensity, following every teaching and practice. But what if nothing was ever actually missing? Right now, take a moment to notice your breathing. You're not making it happen, it's simply occurring naturally. This is what your essential peace is like, always present, always available, requiring no effort to maintain. The searching mind believes it must achieve something, but awareness itself is already complete. Here's your ox practice for this week. Each morning, before you begin any spiritual practice or self-improvement activity, spend 60 seconds simply being present. Don't try to achieve anything or become anyone different. Just rest in the awareness that's reading these words right now. Notice how this simple recognition of what's already here changes your entire approach to the day. The young monk sat in stunned silence as these words penetrated years of spiritual striving. For the first time, he questioned not just his methods, but his fundamental assumption that enlightenment was something he needed to acquire. What if peace wasn't a destination to reach, but his natural state when he stopped fighting against himself? From that day forward, the young monk's practice transformed completely. Instead of trying to achieve some future state, he learned to rest in the awareness that was already present. His meditations became less effortful and more natural, like settling into a familiar embrace. The desperate seeking had been replaced by grateful recognition. This ancient wisdom challenges our achievement-oriented culture. We're conditioned to believe that happiness requires constant improvement, that peace is something we must earn through effort and discipline. But what if the contentment we seek is as natural and available as our own breathing? What if the spiritual path isn't about becoming someone better, but about recognizing the completeness that was never actually lost? Tonight, as you listen to these words, consider that you don't need to become someone different to find peace. You don't need to perfect yourself or achieve some special state. Perhaps the contentment you seek is already here, as natural as your own heartbeat. Like the ox in the meadow, your essential peace has been waiting patiently for you to stop searching long enough to recognize what was never actually lost. The mirror that showed everything. A young monk wandered through life, carrying an invisible burden that grew heavier with each passing day. His mind had become a battleground where anger, jealousy, and pride waged constant war against his desire for inner peace. No matter how many hours he spent in meditation or how fervently he prayed, these unwelcome emotions kept arising like weeds in a carefully tended garden. He felt like a failure, convinced that true monks should be pure and calm, untouched by such disturbing feelings. One morning, when his frustration had reached its peak, this troubled seeker approached the Buddha with desperation in his voice. "Master," he confessed, his words heavy with shame, "I find myself constantly distracted by anger, jealousy, and pride. No matter how hard I try to be pure and calm, these emotions keep arising. Why can't I escape from these feelings that seem to poison everything I touch?" The Buddha listened with the complete attention that only true compassion can provide. Without saying a word, he gestured for the monk to follow him. They walked together through ancient forests where sunlight filtered through emerald leaves, creating patterns of light and shadow that danced with each gentle breeze. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, but filled with the promise of understanding. Eventually, they reached a crystal-clear mountain pool where the water was so still It looked like polished glass. The Buddha instructed the troubled monk to sit by the water's edge, his voice gentle but purposeful. "Look into the water," the Buddha said simply. "Tell me what you see." The monk leaned over the pristine surface and immediately saw his own reflection staring back at him. Every detail was perfectly clear: his worried expression, the tension in his shoulders, even the doubt that clouded his eyes. "I see myself, Master," he replied, though he wondered what significance this simple observation could possibly hold. "Good," the Buddha said, with a knowing smile. "Now reach into the water and stir it with your hand. Move it vigorously, as if you're trying to chase away what you see there." The monk did as instructed, plunging his hand into the cool water and swirling it with increasing intensity. The previously mirror-like surface erupted into chaos. Ripples spread in every direction. The water became cloudy with disturbed sediment, and his reflection completely disappeared. Where once there had been clarity, now there was only turbulent confusion. The harder he stirred, the more distorted everything became. "What do you see now?" the Buddha asked, his voice carrying a depth of understanding that seemed to penetrate the monk's very soul. "I see nothing clearly," the monk replied, frustrated by the obvious futility of his efforts. "My reflection is gone because the water is too disturbed. Everything is cloudy and chaotic. The more I try to change what I see, the worse it becomes." The Buddha nodded with gentle approval. "Now remove your hand and simply wait," he instructed. "Do nothing but observe what happens naturally." The monk withdrew his hand and sat in stillness, watching the water with growing fascination. Gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, the violent ripples began to subside. The cloudy sediment slowly settled to the bottom, and the chaotic movement transformed into gentle, ever smaller circles. As minutes passed in peaceful silence, the water returned to its original mirror-like state, reflecting his face once again with perfect clarity. But something had changed in those moments of watching. The reflection that now appeared seemed somehow different, not in its physical features, but in its quality. The worry lines had softened, the tension had eased, and there was a new depth of understanding in the eyes that looked back at him. It was as if the simple act of patient waiting had revealed something that had been there all along. Modern neuroscience reveals something remarkable about emotional regulation. When we fight against difficult emotions, our amygdala, the brain's alarm system, becomes hyperactive, flooding our system with stress chemicals. But when we practice what researchers call mindful observation, our prefrontal cortex naturally calms the emotional storm. It's like allowing muddy water to settle. The clarity was always there, hidden beneath the turbulence. The mind is exactly like this pool of water, the Buddha explained with infinite gentleness. When it is calm and still, it reflects reality with perfect clarity. You can see yourself and your circumstances as they truly are, without distortion or confusion. But when it becomes disturbed by emotions like anger, jealousy, or pride, it becomes cloudy and chaotic, making it impossible to see anything clearly. Right now, As you listen to these words, notice what emotions might be present in your awareness. Perhaps there's frustration about something that happened today, worry about tomorrow, or judgment about yourself. Instead of trying to push these feelings away, can you simply observe them like ripples on the surface of a pond? Notice how this gentle attention, without trying to fix or change anything, naturally allows the turbulence to begin settling. Here's your mirror practice for this week. When you notice strong emotions arising, anger at a difficult person, jealousy over someone's success, or pride about your achievements, imagine you're looking into that mountain pool. Ask yourself, am I stirring the water right now, or am I allowing it to settle? Then take 3 slow breaths, giving the emotion space to exist without resistance. Watch how this simple shift from fighting to observing transforms your entire emotional experience. True wisdom comes from learning a different approach entirely, the Buddha continued. Instead of fighting against your emotions, observe them with patience and compassion. Watch them arise without judgment, exist without resistance, and pass away without attachment. Like ripples in water, all emotions are temporary by nature. They will settle naturally if you simply allow them the space to do so. The young monk felt a profound shift occurring within his understanding. For years, he had been at war with his own mind, trying to force away any emotion that didn't match his ideal of spiritual purity. But now he began to see that this very struggle had been the source of his suffering. His emotions weren't enemies to be defeated, but natural phenomena to be understood and accepted. From that day forward, the young monk's entire approach to his inner life transformed. When anger arose, instead of fighting it, he would observe it with curious attention. When jealousy appeared, he would watch it with patient compassion. When pride surfaced, he would notice it without judgment. And gradually, he discovered that these emotions, when met with awareness rather than resistance, would naturally subside like ripples returning to stillness. This ancient wisdom speaks directly to our emotionally turbulent modern world. We live in a culture that often treats difficult feelings as problems to be solved immediately through medication, distraction, or positive thinking. Social media amplifies every emotional reaction, and we're constantly bombarded with messages that we should always feel good. But what if the solution isn't in fighting our emotions, but in learning the art of patient, compassionate observation? Tonight, as you rest in the gentle rhythm of your breathing, consider how you might approach your own difficult emotions differently. What would it feel like to stop stirring the water of your mind and instead allow it to settle naturally? Perhaps you'll discover, as the young monk did, that beneath all the temporary turbulence lies a clarity that was never actually disturbed, a mirror-like awareness that reflects reality with perfect peace when given the chance to simply be. The sweetest poison. A devoted disciple approached Buddha one evening, his face etched with confusion and inner turmoil. For months, he had been wrestling with a question that kept him awake at night, disturbing his peace and clouding his understanding. "Master," he said, bowing respectfully. "I don't understand something fundamental about your teachings. You speak of letting go of attachments, yet life offers us so many beautiful experiences: love, success, delicious food, comfortable homes. Are you saying we should avoid all pleasures and live like hermits?" The Buddha's eyes sparkled with understanding, recognizing the sincere confusion of someone genuinely seeking wisdom. Instead of answering directly, he gestured for the disciple to walk with him through the moonlit forest. "Let me share with you a story," the Buddha said, his voice carrying the gentle authority of profound insight. "About a hunter who understood the art of patient deception. This hunter was known throughout the region for his cunning and skill. Unlike other hunters who relied on force or speed, he had mastered the subtle art of temptation. He understood that the most effective traps weren't built with sharp teeth or heavy nets, but with irresistible bait. His secret weapon was honey, pure, golden, impossibly sweet honey that could draw any creature from miles away. One morning, the hunter ventured deep into the forest where a magnificent deer had been spotted. This wasn't an ordinary animal. It was graceful, intelligent, and incredibly cautious. Previous hunters had failed to capture it because they had tried to overpower it with brute force. But this hunter knew that the most powerful trap is one the victim walks into willingly. He found a fresh green leaf and carefully spread a thin layer of honey across its surface. The honey gleamed like liquid gold in the dappled sunlight, its aroma sweet and enticing. But hidden within this natural candy was a deadly poison, colorless, odorless, and completely undetectable. To any passing creature, this would appear to be nothing more than nature's perfect gift. The hunter placed the leaf along a well-traveled forest path and retreated to watch from behind the trees. Hours passed in patient silence until finally the beautiful deer emerged from the undergrowth. It moved with natural grace, alert to every sound and scent, its survival instincts honed by years of avoiding danger. Yet when the sweet aroma of honey reached its nostrils, something shifted in its careful demeanor. The deer approached the leaf cautiously, its natural wisdom warring with the powerful allure of the unexpected treat. It circled the offering several times, testing the air for any sign of danger. Finding nothing alarming, it tentatively extended its tongue and took the smallest possible taste. The honey was everything the aroma had promised, sweet beyond imagination, satisfying in a way that forest fare could never match. Overcome by the exquisite flavor, the deer abandoned its caution and consumed the entire leaf. For a brief, glorious moment, it experienced pure bliss. But within minutes, the hidden poison began its deadly work. The magnificent creature collapsed, its life ending not through violence or struggle, but through the very pleasure it had sought. The Buddha paused in his story, allowing the weight of the metaphor to settle into his disciples' understanding. Modern psychology calls this hedonic adaptation, our tendency to quickly return to baseline happiness despite positive experiences. Neuroscience reveals that pleasure-seeking actually rewires our brains, requiring ever-increasing stimulation to achieve the same satisfaction. What begins as innocent enjoyment can gradually become a prison of endless craving. This honey represents the pleasures of the world, the Buddha explained gently. They appear sweet and satisfying, promising happiness and fulfillment. Many of these experiences are genuinely beautiful. There's nothing inherently wrong with love, success, or comfort. But hidden within attachment to these pleasures is a subtle poison that slowly destroys our peace. Right now, think of something you really enjoy. Perhaps your morning coffee, checking social media, or buying something new. Notice how the anticipation feels almost better than the actual experience. Then observe what happens after the pleasure fades. Do you feel satisfied, or do you immediately begin craving the next hit of that same pleasure? Here's your honey practice for this week. When you're about to indulge in something pleasurable, whether it's food, entertainment, shopping, or even compliments from others, pause and ask yourself, am I enjoying this mindfully, or am I seeking it compulsively? Then engage with the experience fully present, but without attachment to having it continue or repeat. Notice how this awareness transforms pleasure from a trap into genuine appreciation. The wise person, Buddha continued, enjoys life's sweetness without clinging to it. When we experience pleasure without attachment, we can appreciate it fully and let it go without regret or longing. But if we become addicted to that pleasure, it becomes like the poison hidden in honey, slowly destroying our ability to find contentment in simple moments. The trap isn't the pleasure itself, but our desperate need for it to continue forever. The disciple nodded slowly, beginning to understand the subtle distinction. So, you're not asking us to avoid all pleasure, but to enjoy it without becoming enslaved by it. Exactly, the Buddha replied with a warm smile. Practice moderation and mindfulness. When you eat, taste fully but don't gorge. When you love, give completely but don't possess. When you succeed, celebrate genuinely, but don't let it define you. Remember that true happiness isn't found in accumulating pleasures, but in the wisdom to enjoy life's gifts without being trapped by them. This ancient teaching speaks powerfully to our pleasure-saturated culture. We're surrounded by increasingly sophisticated forms of honey, social media designed to be addictive, consumer goods, promising happiness, entertainment that demands our constant attention. Each offers genuine pleasure, but hidden within is the poison of endless craving. We find ourselves needing more likes, more purchases, more stimulation just to feel normal. The path forward isn't to reject all pleasure and live in deprivation. Instead, it's learning to engage with life's sweetness while maintaining our inner freedom. When we practice mindful enjoyment, we discover that even simple pleasures, a moment of silence, a deep breath, genuine human connection, can provide more lasting satisfaction than any external indulgence. We become like the wise deer that can appreciate the forest's natural sweetness without falling victim to artificial temptations. Tonight, as you settle into rest, consider what forms of honey might be affecting your peace. Notice without judgment where you might be seeking happiness in external pleasures rather than cultivating it from within. Perhaps you'll discover that true contentment comes not from avoiding life's sweetness, but from learning to taste it fully without being poisoned by attachment. In this balance between enjoyment and freedom, you'll find a peace that no external pleasure could ever provide. The fast that starved the soul. In a remote mountain monastery, there lived a monk whose dedication to spiritual practice had become legendary among his brothers. Day after day, he pushed his body to its absolute limits, believing that the path to enlightenment lay through the complete denial of all physical needs. He ate only the smallest portions of food, slept on the hardest surfaces, and subjected himself to increasingly severe deprivations. Other monks admired his discipline, yet something profound was missing from his practice. This monk's fasting had become extreme beyond all reason. He would go for days consuming nothing but water, his body growing thinner and weaker with each passing week. His skin stretched tight over protruding bones, his eyes sank deep into their sockets, and his movements became slow and labored. Yet he remained convinced that by punishing his flesh, he was purifying his spirit and drawing closer to the divine. One scorching afternoon, as the monk sat in meditation near the monastery entrance, a young village boy passed by carrying a bundle of food for his family. The child noticed the monk's frighteningly gaunt appearance and stopped, his innocent eyes filled with genuine concern. "Sir," the boy asked with the directness that only children possess, "why are you so thin and tired? Have you not eaten?" The contrast between the child's healthy glow and the monk's skeletal frame was startling. The monk looked down at the boy with hollow eyes that held both pride and exhaustion. "I am fasting to free myself from worldly desires," he replied in a voice barely above a whisper. "Food is a source of attachment, and by abstaining from it, I hope to reach enlightenment. The body's needs distract us from spiritual truth, so I deny them completely." The young boy's face showed confusion mixed with compassion. He looked down at the simple meal he carried, nothing elaborate, just rice and vegetables his mother had prepared with love. Without hesitation, this child made a decision that would change everything. "Please have some of this," he offered, extending a portion of his family's food toward the starving monk. "It may not be much, but it will give you strength." The monk was stunned by this unexpected act of kindness. His rigid mind, so focused on self-denial, struggled to process this simple gesture of human compassion. Here was a child, untrained in spiritual practices, offering freely what the monk had been denying himself for months. Something in the boy's earnest eyes melted a barrier the monk hadn't even known he'd built around his heart. After a long moment of internal struggle, the monk accepted a small portion of the offered food. As he chewed slowly, savoring not just the nourishment, but the love with which it had been given, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months. It wasn't just physical energy returning to his depleted body. It was a warmth in his heart, a reconnection to the human family he had isolated himself from. Tears began to flow down his sunken cheeks as he realized what he had been missing. Modern research reveals something crucial about extreme self-deprivation. When we deny basic needs, our brains enter survival mode, actually making us less capable of empathy, creativity, and spiritual insight. Studies show that moderate self-care enhances our ability to serve others, while extreme asceticism often leads to spiritual pride and isolation. The middle way between indulgence and deprivation creates the optimal conditions for both physical health and spiritual growth. That evening, the monk sought out the Buddha to share his profound realization. "Master," he said, his voice stronger now after accepting nourishment, "I thought I was advancing spiritually by denying my body completely. But today a child showed me something I had forgotten, the importance of compassion, both for others and for myself. Have I been pursuing the wrong path all this time?" The Buddha listened with infinite patience, then smiled with the warmth of someone who had anticipated this moment. "Tell me," he said gently, "if a bird tried to fly with only one wing, how far would it travel?" The monk pondered this simple question. "It couldn't fly at all, Master. A bird needs both wings to soar." "Exactly," the Buddha replied. "The spiritual path requires two wings, wisdom and compassion. Discipline without kindness leads to rigidity and pride. Compassion without discipline can lead to indulgence and weakness. But when both are balanced, you can truly soar toward enlightenment." Right now, consider your own relationship with self-care. Are you pushing yourself too hard in some area, believing that suffering equals progress? Or perhaps you're being too lenient, avoiding necessary growth challenges. Notice how either extreme, harsh self-punishment or complete indulgence actually impedes genuine transformation. Here's your balance practice for this week. Each day, ask yourself, am I treating myself with the same kindness I would show a dear friend? When you notice harsh self-criticism or extreme self-denial, pause and consider what genuine self-compassion would look like. This might mean eating when hungry, resting when tired, or speaking to yourself with gentleness. Paradoxically, this kindness toward yourself enhances rather than diminishes your spiritual progress. The Buddha continued his teaching with profound simplicity. True spiritual growth happens not through punishment, but through understanding. When you care for your body wisely, you create the foundation for mental clarity. When you practice self-compassion, you develop the capacity for genuine compassion toward others. The goal isn't to transcend your humanity, but to embrace it with wisdom. From that day forward, the monk's practice transformed completely. He continued his meditation and study, but now he also ate regular meals, got adequate rest, and most importantly, opened his heart to connection with others. His spiritual progress actually accelerated rather than slowed down. The other monks noticed that he had become not just disciplined, but truly wise and compassionate. This ancient wisdom challenges our modern extremes. In a culture obsessed with optimization and performance, we often swing between harsh self-discipline and complete self-indulgence. We punish ourselves at the gym, deprive ourselves with extreme diets, or overwork ourselves believing suffering equals success. Yet the most profound transformations come through the middle way, firm but gentle, disciplined but kind. The child in this story represents our natural wisdom, the part of us that knows genuine care from disguised cruelty. Sometimes the most spiritual act isn't denying ourselves basic needs, but accepting help and kindness when offered. True strength comes not from the ability to endure punishment, but from the wisdom to know when to persist and when to be gentle. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, consider how you might treat yourself with the balanced care that allows both growth and compassion to flourish together. The gift that cost everything. In a prosperous kingdom where gold flowed like rivers and palaces touched the clouds, there ruled a king whose generosity had become the stuff of legends. Every day, crowds gathered at his palace gates, and every day he gave freely to anyone who asked. Food for the hungry, shelter for the homeless, medicine for the sick, his kindness knew no boundaries. Yet unknown to his subjects, this king was about to face a test that would reveal the true depth of his compassionate heart. This wasn't mere political charity or calculated goodwill. The king genuinely believed that his wealth and power existed solely to serve others. He slept on simple bedding while ensuring his people had comfortable homes. He ate modest meals, while his royal kitchens fed hundreds of visitors daily. His treasuries emptied and refilled constantly, as he gave away fortunes without a second thought. One morning, as golden sunlight illuminated the marble corridors of his palace, a mysterious figure appeared at the royal court. The stranger was dressed in the humble robes of a wandering beggar, but his eyes held an intensity that seemed to pierce through facades and pretenses. This was actually a renowned sage who had heard tales of the king's generosity and had come to discover whether it was genuine or merely for show. He approached the throne with slow, deliberate steps. "Great king," the disguised sage began, his voice carrying both respect and challenge. "Your reputation for boundless generosity has reached even the remotest corners of the land. People speak of your kindness as though it were limitless. But I must ask you directly, is there truly nothing you would not give if someone asked for it?" The king looked down at this humble visitor with eyes that held no arrogance, only sincere conviction. "I would give anything within my power to give," he replied without hesitation. "I hold nothing back if it serves the greater good. My wealth, my kingdom, even my comfort, all of it exists to help others. What is a king if not a servant of his people?" The sage's eyes narrowed slightly as he prepared to test the very foundations of this claim. "Your words are beautiful, noble king," he said slowly, "but words are easy when they cost nothing. If your generosity is truly boundless, then prove it. I ask for your most precious possession, your life itself. Will you give that to me?" A profound silence fell over the royal court. Courtiers gasped, guards tensed, and advisors exchanged worried glances. This was no longer a simple request for charity. This was a demand that challenged the very nature of existence. Yet the king's response came without a moment's hesitation, his voice steady and clear. If my death would serve a greater purpose and help others, then yes, I would gladly surrender my life, the king declared. What value does my existence have if it cannot benefit those who need help? I am no more valuable than any of my subjects. If giving my life would somehow serve the greater good, then it is yours to take. Modern psychology reveals something fascinating about extreme altruism. Studies show that people who are willing to sacrifice for others actually experience greater life, satisfaction, and mental health. This phenomenon, called helper's high, occurs because acts of selfless giving activate the same brain regions associated with receiving rewards. True generosity creates a positive feedback loop that enhances rather than diminishes our own well-being. The sage was astounded by the king's unwavering sincerity. This wasn't bravado or political posturing. It was the genuine response of someone who had transcended the normal boundaries of self-interest. But he pressed further, needing to test whether this was momentary courage or deep conviction. Then prove your words with action, the sage demanded. Prepare yourself for death right now. Without flinching, the king rose from his throne and called for a ceremonial blade. As word spread through the palace, his subjects came running, tears streaming down their faces. "Please, Your Majesty," they pleaded, "don't leave us. We need your guidance, your protection, your wisdom. How can you abandon those who depend on you?" The king looked upon his weeping people with infinite tenderness. "My dear friends," he said, his voice carrying both strength and compassion, "I have lived my entire life in service to you. If my death is now requested and could serve some greater purpose, then it is my honor to give it. True love sometimes requires the ultimate sacrifice. Right now, consider what you hold most precious in your life. Perhaps it's your reputation, your relationships, your dreams, or simply your sense of security. What would it feel like to hold these treasures lightly, willing to release them if it would truly serve others? This doesn't mean being reckless with your life, but examining how attachment to our possessions and identity can limit our capacity for genuine love. Here's your generosity practice for this week. Each day, identify one thing you're holding too tightly, perhaps your need to be right, your desire for recognition, or your attachment to a particular outcome. Practice releasing your grip on this attachment, even just slightly. Notice how this letting go doesn't diminish you, but actually creates more space for joy and connection. True generosity begins with loosening our desperate grasp on what we think we need to be happy. As the king prepared for what he believed would be his final moments, something extraordinary happened. The beggar threw off his disguise, revealing himself as the sage he truly was. His face shone with admiration and deep respect. "Noble king," he declared, "I do not want your life. I wanted only to witness whether your generosity was authentic or performed for others to see. You have shown me the rarest quality in human existence, a heart truly free from selfish attachment." The sage continued, his voice filled with wonder. "Most people give only what they can afford to lose. You were prepared to give what you could not afford to lose. This is the difference between charity and true compassion. Your willingness to sacrifice everything shows that you understand the deepest truth. We find our greatest fulfillment not in holding on to life, but in offering it freely for the benefit of others. This ancient story challenges our modern understanding of self-care and personal boundaries. We're often told to put ourselves first, yet the deepest satisfaction comes from moments when we transcend narrow self-interest. The king's willingness to give everything wasn't self-destructive. It was the natural expression of a heart that had discovered its connection to all life. When we truly understand that our well-being and others' well-being are inseparable, generosity becomes not a burden, but a joy. Tonight, as you reflect on this tale of ultimate generosity, consider how you might live with greater openness and less attachment. What would change in your daily life if you truly believed that giving enhances rather than diminishes your own happiness? Perhaps you'll discover that the path to genuine fulfillment lies not in accumulating and protecting, but in sharing freely the gifts you've been given. The tree that taught time. Deep in the mountains where mist danced between ancient peaks, a young monk arrived at his monastery burning with impatience. His heart raced with spiritual ambition, his mind churned with questions about enlightenment, and his entire being vibrated with the urgent need to achieve something profound. He had read every sacred text, memorized countless teachings, and practiced meditation with fierce intensity. Yet despite all his efforts, the peace he sought remained frustratingly elusive. Every morning, this eager seeker would approach his master with the same desperate question. "When will I reach enlightenment?" he would ask, his voice tight with barely contained frustration. "I've been practicing for months now with complete dedication. I follow every instruction, attend every teaching session, meditate for hours each day. Why do I still feel so far from understanding?" The wise old abbot watched this young monk struggle with patient understanding. He had seen countless seekers arrive with similar urgency, demanding immediate results from the spiritual path. The modern world had trained them to expect instant gratification, fast food, quick fixes, rapid transformations. But wisdom, the abbot knew, followed an entirely different timeline. One crisp morning, when the young monk's frustration had reached its peak, the abbot invited him to take a walk through the forest surrounding the monastery. They walked in contemplative silence until they reached a massive oak tree that stood like a cathedral pillar against the sky. Its trunk was so wide that 10 people holding hands couldn't encircle it, and its branches spread in all directions, providing shade and shelter to countless creatures. The tree radiated an aura of profound stability and peace. "Do you see this magnificent tree?" the abbot asked, placing his weathered hand against the deeply grooved bark. "Tell me, how long do you think it took to grow to this size and strength?" The young monk studied the enormous oak, taking in its impressive height and breadth. "I suppose it must have taken many decades, perhaps even a century or more," he replied, though he couldn't understand what this had to do with his spiritual question. The abbot nodded thoughtfully. Indeed, this tree has been growing for over 200 years. It began as a tiny acorn, no bigger than your thumb. Year by year, season by season, it extended its roots deeper into the earth and stretched its branches higher toward the sky. It weathered countless storms, endured years of drought, and persevered through harsh winters when growth seemed impossible. But here's what's remarkable, the abbot continued, his voice carrying the weight of deep understanding. This tree never once grew frantically. It never pushed itself to grow faster than its natural rhythm. It simply remained present each moment, drawing nourishment from the soil, reaching toward the light, responding to the changing seasons with perfect patience. Its strength comes precisely from this unhurried, steady growth. Modern neuroscience reveals something profound about how lasting change occurs in our brains. Neural pathways that support deep transformation require time to develop and strengthen. Rushing the process actually impedes progress, while patient consistency allows new patterns of thinking and being to become permanently established. Like the tree's growth rings, wisdom develops layer by layer, each experience adding depth and resilience to our understanding. The abbot gestured for the young monk to sit beneath the tree's vast canopy. Your spiritual journey is exactly like this tree's growth, he explained gently. Enlightenment cannot be forced or hurried. It unfolds naturally when we provide the right conditions, regular practice, patient persistence, and acceptance of our current stage of development. The more you grasp after quick results, the more you disturb the natural process of awakening. Right now, notice your own relationship with time and growth. Are you pushing yourself impatiently toward some goal, believing that urgency will accelerate your progress? Take a deep breath and feel yourself settling into this present moment. Like the tree, you're growing even when you can't see immediate evidence of change. Here's your tree practice for this week. Each morning, spend 2 minutes simply being present without trying to achieve anything. Imagine yourself as a tree, drawing nourishment from this moment while remaining open to natural growth. When impatience arises, remind yourself that the most powerful transformations happen gradually, below the surface of consciousness. Trust that consistent presence creates the perfect conditions for wisdom to emerge naturally. The tree teaches us about the power of patient presence, the abbot continued, running his fingers along the textured bark. See how deeply its roots extend into the earth. These roots weren't established overnight. They grew slowly, steadily, finding nourishment and stability in the depths. Similarly, your spiritual roots need time to develop. Each day of practice, each moment of mindfulness, each small act of compassion strengthens these invisible foundations. The young monk sat quietly, feeling something shift in his understanding. For the first time in months, the urgent pressure in his chest began to ease. He realized that his impatience had been like trying to force a flower to bloom by pulling on its petals. True growth required patience, trust, and acceptance of natural timing. But how will I know if I'm making progress? the young monk asked, his voice now softer and more curious than demanding. The abbot smiled warmly. The tree doesn't measure its daily growth, yet it never stops growing. Progress in spiritual practice is often invisible from day to day, but clearly evident when viewed over longer periods. Focus not on reaching some future state, but on fully inhabiting each moment of practice. Like the tree, find joy in the process itself rather than fixating on distant goals. From that day forward, the young monk's entire approach to spiritual practice transformed. He continued his meditation and study, but now with the patient persistence of a tree reaching toward light. He stopped demanding immediate enlightenment and began appreciating the subtle beauty of gradual awakening. Paradoxically, this release of urgency allowed his practice to deepen more quickly than ever before. This ancient wisdom speaks directly to our achievement-obsessed culture. We live in a world of instant everything, fast internet, rapid delivery, quick fixes for complex problems. Yet the most meaningful transformations in life follow natural rhythms that cannot be rushed. Whether we're developing relationships, building skills, or growing in wisdom, patience with the process often proves more valuable than intensity of effort. Tonight, as you settle into rest, imagine yourself growing like that mighty oak. Feel your roots extending deeper into wisdom, your branches reaching higher toward understanding. Trust that every moment of sincere practice adds another ring of growth to your developing wisdom. In this patient acceptance of natural timing, you'll discover that the journey itself becomes the destination. The man who had everything and nothing. There once lived a merchant whose wealth could have purchased entire kingdoms. His warehouses overflowed with silks from distant lands. His vaults glittered with precious gems, and his estates stretched beyond the horizon. Servants attended to his every need, and nobles competed for invitations to his lavish banquets. Yet despite possessing everything the world considered valuable, this man carried within his chest a hollow ache that no amount of gold could fill. Each morning, the merchant would wake in his silk-draped chamber and feel the familiar emptiness gnawing at his soul. He would walk through rooms filled with priceless artifacts, past gardens where exotic flowers bloomed in perfect rows, and still feel as though something essential was missing. That his meals, prepared by the finest chefs, tasted like ash in his mouth. His entertainment, provided by the most talented performers, felt hollow and meaningless. The wealthy man had heard whispers about a wise monk who possessed an extraordinary understanding of life's mysteries. People spoke of this teacher's ability to help others find genuine peace and happiness. Desperate for answers, the merchant decided to seek out this monk, hoping that perhaps spiritual wisdom could provide what material abundance had failed to deliver. He prepared for the journey with his usual extravagance, loading a caravan with gifts and provisions. When the merchant finally found the monk, he was surprised by what he encountered. The teacher sat peacefully beneath a simple tree, wearing humble robes and possessing nothing but a wooden bowl and a few worn texts. Yet there was something in the monk's presence that the merchant's wealth had never provided, a deep contentment that seemed to radiate from within. This poor man possessed a richness that all the merchant's treasures couldn't match. "Revered teacher," the merchant began, bowing respectfully despite his higher social status, "I have everything a person could wish for: wealth beyond measure, status, luxury, and comfort. Yet I feel an emptiness that grows stronger each day. I've tried to fill this void with more possessions, grander experiences, and greater achievements. Nothing works. Can you help me understand why I remain so deeply unsatisfied?" The monk listened with complete attention, his eyes reflecting a compassion that seemed to see directly into the merchant's heart. "I can indeed help you," the monk replied with a gentle smile, "but first, I must grant you 3 special wishes. These are not ordinary wishes. They carry the power to transform your understanding completely. Think carefully before you speak, for each wish will teach you something profound about the nature of happiness." The merchant's eyes lit up with excitement. Here was exactly what he'd been seeking: magical solutions to his persistent problems. He pondered for several moments, then made his first wish with complete confidence. "I wish to be free from all my worries and troubles," he declared. "Surely without these burdens, I will finally find peace." The monk closed his eyes in silent meditation, then nodded solemnly. "Your wish is granted," he said softly. "Return home and observe your mind carefully over the coming days." The merchant hurried back to his estate, filled with anticipation. But as days passed, he noticed something puzzling. His mind continued producing the same worried thoughts about business deals, family relationships, and future security. The familiar anxieties still arose whenever he faced challenges or uncertainties. Frustrated and confused, he returned to the monk. "The wish didn't work," the merchant complained. "I still worry about everything: my investments, my reputation, my health. Nothing has changed." Modern neuroscience explains what the merchant was experiencing. Our brains are evolutionarily wired to anticipate problems and seek security. Worry isn't an external force that can be magically removed. It's a natural function of human consciousness. True freedom from worry comes not through elimination, but through changing our relationship with uncertain thoughts. The monk smiled knowingly. Worries don't disappear simply because we wish them away. They arise from our attachment to controlling outcomes we cannot control. Real peace comes from understanding that uncertainty is life's natural state and learning to rest comfortably within that uncertainty. Feeling somewhat foolish but still hopeful, the merchant made his second wish. "Then I wish to be free of all my desires. If wanting things makes me restless, I'll eliminate wanting altogether." Again, the monk granted the wish through silent meditation. The merchant returned home, determined to suppress all desires. But he quickly discovered that wanting arose as naturally as breathing. He still desired good food when hungry, comfort when tired, and success in his endeavors. Fighting against these natural impulses only created more internal conflict. Back at the monk's tree, feeling more frustrated than ever, the merchant demanded an explanation. "Why do these wishes fail to work?" he asked. "Desires, like worries, are part of human nature," the monk explained patiently. "Trying to eliminate them by force is like trying to stop a river from flowing. Wisdom lies not in destroying desire, but in understanding its impermanent nature and not being enslaved by it." The merchant sat quietly, beginning to sense a pattern in these failures. Something deeper was being revealed about the nature of his seeking. For his final wish, he chose carefully. "I wish to understand myself," he said with new humility. "I want to see clearly why I remain restless despite having everything I thought I wanted." The monk's eyes sparkled with approval. "Now you have made a truly wise wish," he said warmly. Through patient teaching and guided reflection, the monk helped the merchant recognize a profound truth. His emptiness didn't stem from lacking external things, but from not understanding his own nature. He had been trying to fill an inner void with outer acquisitions, like attempting to quench thirst by collecting beautiful cups instead of drinking water. Here's your understanding practice. Notice when you feel that familiar sense of something missing. Instead of immediately seeking external solutions, pause and ask, what am I really looking for beneath this wanting? Often, we'll discover we're seeking feelings, security, love, purpose, peace, that no possession can provide. These treasures are already available within our own awareness. The merchant's transformation wasn't about acquiring new insights, but recognizing what had always been present. His wealth remained the same, his circumstances unchanged, but his relationship to them shifted completely. He discovered that contentment wasn't a goal to achieve, but his natural state when he stopped constantly reaching for something else. Returning to his estate, the merchant found that his possessions now felt like tools rather than sources of identity. Food satisfied hunger without promising eternal happiness. Success brought pleasure without becoming a desperate need. The hollow ache had been filled, not by adding something new, but by recognizing the completeness that was always already there. What strikes you most about this merchant's journey? Perhaps it's the recognition that our deepest longing isn't for more experiences, but for the peace that comes from truly knowing ourselves. In a world constantly selling us solutions to problems we didn't know we had, this ancient wisdom points toward the treasure that requires no purchasing, the contentment of understanding our own complete nature. The beggar who owned everything. A man shuffled through the dusty streets of the village, his clothes patched and worn, his bare feet calloused from walking endless miles in search of work. He owned nothing except the threadbare garments on his back and a small clay bowl for collecting food. Other villagers averted their eyes when he passed, as if poverty might be contagious. Yet this beggar was about to receive a lesson that would transform his understanding of wealth forever. Word had spread that the Buddha himself was teaching in a nearby grove, and people from across the region were gathering to hear his wisdom. The beggar, despite feeling unworthy among the well-dressed crowds, found himself drawn to the teacher's presence. Perhaps, he thought, even someone as lowly as himself might benefit from hearing these sacred teachings. He approached hesitantly, keeping to the edges of the assembled crowd. As the teaching concluded and people began to disperse, the beggar surprised himself by approaching the Buddha directly. His voice trembled with both reverence and desperation as he spoke. "Blessed One, I am the poorest man in this village. I own nothing in this world and struggle daily just to survive. Can you give me something, anything, that might relieve my suffering and help me find some measure of peace?" The Buddha looked at this humble man with eyes that seemed to see far beyond surface appearances. Instead of offering the expected response, perhaps food, money, or simple comfort, the Buddha asked an unexpected question. "Tell me, friend, what do you already possess?" The beggar's face showed genuine confusion. "Nothing, blessed one. I have no land, no money, no home, no possessions of any kind. I am completely empty-handed." He held up his worn palms as if to demonstrate their emptiness. But the Buddha wasn't finished with his inquiry. "Do you have your eyes?" he asked gently. "Well, yes, of course I do," the beggar replied, puzzled by such an obvious question. "And would you trade those eyes for a chest filled with gold?" the Buddha continued. "Think carefully. Someone offers you immense wealth in exchange for your sight. Would you accept such a bargain?" The beggar recoiled at the suggestion. "Never," he exclaimed. "Without my eyes, I couldn't see the beauty of sunrise, the faces of kind people, or find my way in the world. No amount of gold could replace the gift of sight." For the first time in the conversation, his voice carried conviction rather than desperation. The Buddha nodded approvingly and continued his gentle questioning. "What about your hands? Would you trade them for a magnificent palace with hundreds of servants?" Again, the beggar shook his head vigorously. "My hands allow me to touch, to work, to express kindness through gesture. They're how I connect with the world around me. I could never give them up, no matter what palace was offered." Something was beginning to shift in his understanding, though he couldn't yet name what it was. "And your legs?" the Buddha asked. "Would you surrender your ability to walk for an entire kingdom to rule?" The beggar found himself laughing, despite his circumstances. What good would ruling a kingdom be if I couldn't walk through it, couldn't move freely, couldn't experience the simple joy of putting one foot in front of the other? His voice grew stronger with each response. "These legs have carried me across countless miles, through good times and bad. They're more valuable than any crown." Modern research reveals something profound about how we perceive wealth. Psychologists have discovered that people consistently undervalue what they already possess, while overestimating the happiness that new acquisitions will bring. This hedonic adaptation blinds us to the extraordinary gifts we experience every moment. The beggar was discovering what scientists now call gratitude intervention, the practice of recognizing existing abundance. The Buddha's expression radiated warmth and understanding. "You see, my friend, you began our conversation claiming to own nothing. Yet in just a few moments, you've identified treasures more valuable than all the gold in royal treasuries. Your eyes are priceless. Your hands are irreplaceable. Your legs are beyond any earthly fortune. How can someone who possesses such riches consider himself poor? The beggar stood in stunned silence as this new perspective settled into his consciousness. For his entire life, he had measured wealth by what he lacked, rather than appreciating what he possessed. He had focused so intently on his empty pockets that he'd never noticed his full body. The realization was both humbling and liberating. But what about my mind? The Buddha continued. Your ability to think, to learn, to feel compassion, to experience wonder. Could any material treasure compare to the consciousness that allows you to understand these very words? The beggar's eyes widened as he grasped the full magnitude of what was being revealed. Here's your wealth recognition practice. Right now, place one hand on your chest and feel your heart beat. This miraculous organ has been working tirelessly to keep you alive since before you were born. Take a conscious breath and appreciate your lungs' automatic function. Look around and notice how your eyes instantly process colors, shapes, and distances. You possess technologies more sophisticated than anything humans have ever created. The Buddha's teaching continued with gentle precision. True poverty isn't the absence of material possessions. It's the inability to recognize the abundance we already carry. When we learn to appreciate our inherent gifts, we discover a wealth that cannot be stolen, lost, or diminished. This recognition transforms not our circumstances, but our entire relationship to those circumstances. The beggar felt tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. These weren't tears of sadness, but of profound gratitude. He understood now that he had been living like someone dying of thirst while standing in a flowing river. The abundance had always been there. He simply hadn't known how to see it. From that moment forward, the beggar's daily experience underwent a complete transformation. He still faced the same material challenges, still needed to seek food and shelter, but now he walked through the world as someone who knew his true worth. When he awoke each morning, his first thought was gratitude for the gift of another day. When he ate simple food, he tasted it with the appreciation of someone who understood nourishment as a miracle. The villagers began to notice something different about this man they had once pitied. There was a dignity in his bearing, a contentment in his manner that seemed unrelated to his external circumstances. Some even found themselves envying his obvious peace of mind. He had discovered the secret that eludes many wealthy people. Genuine satisfaction comes not from having more, but from fully appreciating what we already possess. Consider your own relationship with abundance. What gifts are you carrying that you've stopped noticing? Perhaps it's time to conduct your own inventory of the irreplaceable treasures you possess, starting with the breath that's sustaining you right now. The riddle of 6 truths. In ancient times, a powerful king grew curious about the nature of knowledge itself. He had heard countless debates among scholars, each claiming to possess the ultimate truth about reality. Frustrated by their contradictions, he devised an unusual experiment. The king summoned 6 men who had been blind since birth, men whose other senses had grown extraordinarily sharp in compensation for their lack of sight. Today, the king announced to his assembled court, "We shall discover the true nature of an elephant." He had his servants lead the 6 blind men to different positions around a magnificent elephant that stood patiently in the palace courtyard. Each man was instructed to explore the creature thoroughly and then describe exactly what an elephant was. The king settled back on his throne, eager to witness what would unfold. The first blind man found himself positioned beside the elephant's massive flank. He pressed his hands against the warm, rough surface and explored its vast expanse. After several minutes of careful examination, he declared with absolute confidence, "An elephant is exactly like a wall. It's enormous, sturdy, and immovable. I have felt every inch of this creature, and there can be no doubt about its true nature." The second man, who had been exploring the elephant's long, curved tusk, immediately protested. "You're completely wrong," he exclaimed. "An elephant is nothing like a wall. It's smooth, hard, and pointed like a great spear. I've examined this beast thoroughly, and anyone with functioning hands can feel that it's clearly a weapon designed for battle." Meanwhile, the third blind man had discovered the elephant's trunk. He marveled at its flexibility, its ability to move in all directions, and its incredible strength. "Both of you are mistaken," he announced firmly. "An elephant is obviously a large, powerful snake. It's long, flexible, and incredibly strong. I can feel it moving and coiling. There's no question about what this creature truly is." The fourth man, who had wrapped his arms around one of the elephant's thick legs, shook his head in disbelief at his companion's descriptions. "You're all completely wrong," he declared. "An elephant is like a massive tree trunk. It's round, solid, and rooted firmly to the ground. I've embraced this pillar of living wood, and I know with certainty what stands before us." From his position near the elephant's ear, the fifth man listened to this debate with growing frustration. "None of you understand what you're talking about," he called out. "An elephant is clearly like a great fan. It's wide, flat, and moves back and forth, creating cooling breezes. I've felt its gentle motion and experienced its function. How can you all be so blind to the obvious truth?" The sixth blind man, who had been examining the elephant's thin, rope-like tail, could no longer contain his amazement at his companion's ignorance. "You're all completely deluded," he announced. "An elephant is nothing more than a rope. It's long, thin, and flexible with a tuft of hair at the end. I've held it in my hands and know its true nature better than any of you." What began as a peaceful exploration quickly escalated into a heated argument. Each man became more entrenched in his position, more convinced that his limited experience represented the complete truth. Voices rose, tempers flared, and soon the 6 men were shouting over each other, each absolutely certain that the others were either lying or incompetent. The elephant stood calmly in the center of this human storm, unchanged by their fierce disagreements. Modern cognitive science explains what was happening to these men. Each was experiencing what researchers call confirmation bias, the tendency to interpret new information in ways that confirm our existing beliefs. Neuroscientists have discovered that our brains literally filter reality through the lens of previous experience, often missing crucial information that doesn't fit our current understanding. The blind men weren't lying or stupid. They were demonstrating a fundamental limitation of human perception. The king watched this spectacle unfold with growing understanding. When the argument reached its peak, he raised his hand for silence. "My friends," he said with gentle authority, "each of you has touched a different part of the elephant. Each of you has experienced something real and true. Yet none of you has grasped the complete picture. The elephant possesses all the qualities you've described, and many more besides." The 6 men fell silent, suddenly realizing the limitation of their individual perspectives. Each had assumed that his partial experience represented total knowledge. None had considered that others might be experiencing different but equally valid aspects of the same reality. Their argument had been based not on falsehood, but on incomplete understanding. Here's your perspective practice. Think of a recent disagreement you've had with someone. Instead of assuming they were wrong and you were right, consider this question: what part of the elephant might they have been touching? What if their viewpoint, however different from yours, revealed something real that you couldn't see from your position? This doesn't mean all opinions are equally valid, but rather that truth is often larger than any single perspective can contain. When Buddha later told this story to his disciples, he used it to illustrate profound truths about the nature of understanding. In life, he explained, people approach reality from different angles, shaped by their unique experiences, cultural backgrounds, and personal limitations. Each person's viewpoint reveals something genuine, yet remains incomplete. Wisdom comes not from insisting that our perspective is the only valid one, but from recognizing the partial nature of all human understanding. The elephant in this story represents the vastness of existence itself. Whether we're discussing spiritual truth, political solutions, or even simple daily experiences, we're often like the blind men, confident in our limited perceptions, while missing the larger picture. True understanding emerges when we hold our beliefs lightly, remaining open to learning from others whose experience differs from our own. This ancient wisdom offers a profound antidote to the polarization that characterizes our modern world. Social media algorithms create echo chambers where we only encounter viewpoints that confirm what we already believe. We've become nations of blind men arguing about elephants, certain that our fragment of experience represents the complete truth. But what if genuine progress comes not from winning arguments, but from combining our partial understandings into a more complete picture? The 6 blind men eventually became close friends, each appreciating the unique insights the others brought to their shared understanding of elephants. They learned that collaboration revealed far more than competition ever could. In our own lives, we might discover that the people who see things differently aren't enemies to defeat, but teachers who can help us touch parts of reality we never knew existed. The robe worth more than gold. A poor village weaver named Kalyana lived in a humble mud hut at the edge of town, surviving on the few coins he earned, mending torn clothing and weaving coarse cloth from whatever scraps he could find. His entire wardrobe consisted of a single patched robe that had been his father's, then his grandfather's before that. The fabric was so worn that threads came loose with every movement, and the original color had long since faded to an indeterminate brown. Yet this simple garment was about to become the most precious gift in an entire kingdom. News spread through the village like wildfire. The Buddha himself was coming to teach. Wealthy merchants prepared elaborate offerings of silk and jewelry. Nobles commissioned golden statues, and even middle-class families gathered their finest possessions to present to the enlightened master. Kalyana watched these preparations with growing sadness, knowing he had nothing worthy to offer such a revered teacher. His poverty had never felt more acute than in this moment of wanting to give. As the day approached, Kalyana's desire to participate in the offering ceremony grew overwhelming. He looked around his sparse dwelling, a cracked water pot, a worn sleeping mat, a few tools for his trade. Nothing seemed appropriate for someone of the Buddha's stature. Then his eyes fell upon his only robe, hanging on a wooden peg by the door. The idea that formed in his mind seemed almost ridiculous. How could his tattered old robe possibly compare to the magnificent gifts others would present? Yet something deep in his heart told him that the value of a gift lay not in its market price, but in the love with which it was given. If this robe was all he had, then it would have to be enough. When the Buddha arrived at the village center, crowds gathered in reverent silence. One by one, the wealthy citizens stepped forward with their lavish offerings. Silk merchants presented bolts of fabric that shimmered like captured sunlight. Jewelers offered necklaces that could have fed entire families for years. Each gift was received with equal grace, the Buddha's eyes reflecting appreciation for both the offering and the giver's intention. Kalyana stood at the back of the crowd, clutching his folded robe with trembling hands. As the ceremony continued, his courage began to waver. What would people think when they saw him approach the master with such a humble offering? Would they laugh at his presumption? Would the Buddha himself be embarrassed by such a pitiful gift? But then the Buddha's eyes found his across the crowd. In that gaze, Kalyana saw not judgment, but infinite compassion, not expectations, but complete acceptance. Something in that look gave him the courage to step forward. With each step, his nervousness transformed into determination, his shame into quiet dignity. When Kalyana reached the Buddha, he removed his robe and held it out with both hands. The crowd fell silent, some whispering in amazement at his audacity. Here was a man offering his only garment, leaving himself with nothing but the simple undercloth worn beneath. His voice barely above a whisper, Kalyana spoke from his heart. "Blessed teacher, I have no gold or precious stones to offer you. This old robe is everything I own in this world. It may be worthless to others, but I give it to you with complete devotion and gratitude for your teachings. Please accept this humble gift from one who has nothing else to give." The Buddha's response surprised everyone present. Instead of simply accepting the robe politely, he stood up and received it with the same reverence he might show a sacred relic. He held the worn fabric gently in his hands, examining it not with his eyes but with his heart. Then, to the astonishment of the entire gathering, he put on Kalyana's robe over his own garments. Modern psychology reveals something profound about the neuroscience of giving. Research shows that acts of generosity activate the brain's reward centers more powerfully when they involve personal sacrifice. The joy we experience from giving isn't proportional to the gift's monetary value, but to the meaning and intention behind it. Kalyana was experiencing what scientists now call helper's high, the euphoria that comes from selfless giving. "My friends," the Buddha addressed the crowd, his voice carrying special warmth, "look at this beautiful robe that Kalyana has offered. Do you see only worn fabric and faded colors? I see something far more precious. This gift represents complete generosity, the willingness to give everything one possesses without holding anything back." He continued, gesturing to the magnificent offerings that surrounded them. "These other gifts, beautiful as they are, represent only a portion of their giver's wealth. But Kalyana has given 100% of what he owns. His sacrifice is complete, his generosity absolute. In the eyes of wisdom, this makes his offering infinitely more valuable than all the gold and jewels combined." The crowd began to murmur with understanding, seeing Kalyana's gift through new eyes. What had seemed like poverty was revealed as profound richness of spirit. The weaver's willingness to give everything transformed his humble offering into something sacred. Here's your generosity reflection. Think about your own giving. Do you tend to offer only what's convenient or comfortable to part with? What would it feel like to give something that actually matters to you, something whose absence you truly notice? True generosity isn't measured by the size of the gift, but by the size of the sacrifice relative to what we have. For the remainder of his stay in the village, the Buddha continued wearing Kalyana's robe. This simple act honored not just the gift itself, but the spirit of complete offering it represented. The other villagers, inspired by Kalyana's example, began to reconsider their own relationship with possessions and giving. They realized that true wealth wasn't about what you could afford to give away, but about what you were willing to give away. Kalyana returned home that day, wearing borrowed clothes from neighbors who had been moved by his sacrifice. But more importantly, he carried within his heart a joy that no material possession could provide. He had discovered that the act of giving everything paradoxically made him feel richer than he had ever felt before. His empty hands felt fuller than when they had clutched possessions. His bare shoulders felt warmer than when they had been covered by his old robe. The story of Kalyana's robe spread far beyond that village, inspiring countless others to examine their own capacity for selfless giving. It became a reminder that the most precious gifts often come wrapped in the simplest packages, and that generosity is measured not by what we have to give, but by how much of ourselves we're willing to share. the fish that chose freedom. Deep in an emerald forest where sunlight danced through ancient canopies, a golden fish lived in perfect harmony with the flowing river that had been its home for countless seasons. This wasn't an ordinary fish. Its scales shimmered like captured starlight, and its graceful movements seemed to embody the very essence of flowing water. Every creature in the forest knew of this magnificent being, whose beauty had become legendary throughout the region. Yet beauty, as this fish would soon discover, can sometimes become its own kind of prison. One morning, as mist still clung to the water's surface, a skilled fisherman arrived at the riverbank. He had traveled many miles after hearing tales of the golden fish, driven not by hunger, but by the prospect of an extraordinary catch that could change his fortunes forever. The fisherman knew that such a rare creature would be worth a king's ransom to the right buyer. He cast his nets with the patience of someone who understood that some prizes require careful waiting. Hours passed before the fisherman felt the telltale tug that indicated success. As he drew in his net, his heart raced with excitement. There, gleaming like liquid gold in the morning light, was the legendary fish he had sought. The creature's beauty exceeded even the most extravagant descriptions he had heard. This single catch would indeed make him wealthy beyond his wildest dreams. But as the fisherman prepared to secure his prize, something unexpected occurred. The golden fish spoke, its voice carrying a clarity that transcended the boundary between species. "Kind fisherman," it said, its words rippling through the air like water itself, "I understand why you have caught me. My golden scales would indeed bring you great wealth. But before you claim your prize, might I ask you to consider something far more valuable than gold?" The fisherman paused, startled by this turn of events. In all his years of fishing, he had never encountered anything like this. Curiosity momentarily overcame his greed, as he found himself genuinely interested in what the fish might offer. "Speak then," he said, though his grip on the net remained firm. "What could possibly be more valuable than your golden scales?" "My freedom," the fish replied simply. "And in choosing to grant it, you would receive something far more precious than any material reward. You would experience the joy that comes from an act of pure compassion. You would know the peace that follows when we choose love over profit, mercy over advantage." The fisherman scoffed at this suggestion. "Beautiful words," he said, "but words don't pay for food or shelter. Your scales could solve all my financial problems. Why would I trade certain wealth for abstract feelings?" He began to lift the net from the water, his practical mind rejecting what seemed like naive idealism. At that precise moment, as if summoned by the fish's plight, a group of traveling monks emerged from the forest path. Among them walked the Buddha himself, whose presence seemed to bring an immediate sense of calm to the entire scene. The Buddha observed the situation with eyes that saw far beyond the surface drama. He understood that this moment contained teachings more valuable than gold. "Friend," the Buddha addressed the fisherman gently, "you hold in your hands a choice that will define not just this moment, but the kind of person you choose to become. Tell me, what brings more lasting satisfaction? Possessing something beautiful, or allowing beauty to flourish freely. Modern neuroscience reveals something fascinating about how acts of compassion affect our brains. Studies show that when we choose empathy over self-interest, our brains release a cocktail of chemicals, oxytocin, dopamine, and endorphins, that create feelings of well-being more lasting than those produced by material acquisitions. The Buddha was pointing toward what researchers now call compassion satisfaction, the deep fulfillment that comes from alleviating another's suffering. The fisherman found himself genuinely torn. Part of him remained focused on the practical benefits of his catch, but another part, stirred by the Buddha's presence and the fish's eloquent plea, began to feel something unfamiliar. For the first time, he truly looked at the golden fish, not as a commodity, but as a living being with its own desires and rights. "What if I do release you?" the fisherman asked the fish. "How do I know you're not simply trying to escape without offering anything in return?" The fish's response was immediate and heartfelt. "I offer you the only thing of true value that I possess, my gratitude and the knowledge that you have acted from your highest nature. When you release me, you free not just my body, but something within yourself that has been trapped by the belief that happiness comes from taking rather than giving. Here's your freedom practice. Think of something you're currently holding on to tightly, perhaps a grudge, a need to be right, or even a material possession you're afraid to lose. What would it feel like to release your grip, not because you have to, but because you choose compassion over control? Notice how the very thought of letting go might create both fear and a strange sense of relief. The Buddha spoke again, his words carrying the weight of profound wisdom. True wealth isn't measured by what we can take from the world, but by what we can give to it. This fish offers you an opportunity to discover the richness that comes from choosing mercy over advantage. Such moments are rare gifts, chances to transcend our smaller selves and act from our highest nature. Something shifted within the fisherman's heart. The golden scales that had seemed so valuable moments before now appeared almost insignificant compared to the choice before him. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered the net back into the water and opened it wide. The golden fish swam in a joyful circle before disappearing into the deeper currents, free once again. In that moment of release, the fisherman experienced something extraordinary. Instead of feeling loss, he felt expansion. Instead of regret, he felt a deep satisfaction that seemed to emanate from his very core. He had discovered what the fish had promised, that choosing compassion over profit created a wealth that no amount of gold could match. The Buddha smiled, recognizing the transformation that had occurred. "You have just experienced one of life's greatest treasures," he told the fisherman. "The joy that comes from setting something free rather than possessing it. This feeling will remain with you long after any material wealth would have been spent." Years later, the fisherman would tell this story to anyone who would listen, describing it as the moment his life truly began. He never again caught another golden fish, but he never needed to. The wealth he had gained from that single act of compassion proved more valuable and lasting than all the treasures of the earth. the criminal who found light. In the darkest shadows of an ancient forest, where even sunlight seemed reluctant to enter, there lived a man whose very name struck terror into the hearts of all who heard it. Angulimala, which means garland of fingers, had earned this fearsome title through acts so violent that mothers whispered his name to frighten disobedient children. Around his neck hung a gruesome necklace made from the fingers of his victims. 999 fingers adorned this macabre ornament, and he sought just one more to complete his collection of 1,000. But Angulimala had not always been a monster. He was born as Ahimsaka, a name meaning harmless one, to loving parents who had raised him with kindness and hope. As a young man, he had been gentle, intelligent, and devoted to his studies. Yet a series of cruel betrayals and manipulations by a jealous teacher had slowly twisted his heart, transforming compassion into rage, trust into suspicion, and hope into despair. Now, consumed by darkness and driven by a madness that had replaced all human feeling, Angulimala roamed the forest like a predatory beast. Entire villages had been abandoned as people fled in terror from his path. Even the king's bravest soldiers refused to enter the forest where this demon walked. It seemed that nothing could stop his reign of terror, that he was lost forever to the shadows that had consumed his soul. On this particular morning, as mist clung to the forest floor and birds remained silent in their hidden perches, Angulimala crouched behind a massive tree trunk. His wild eyes scanned the forest path, watching for the next victim who would provide the final finger for his grisly collection. He had become so consumed by violence that he could no longer remember why he had begun this murderous quest. Killing had become not just his purpose, but his entire identity. Then, through the morning mist, a solitary figure appeared on the forest path. It was a monk walking with unhurried steps, his saffron robes bright against the forest's gloom. What struck Angulimala immediately was the complete absence of fear in the monk's bearing. While others ran screaming from these woods, this man moved with serene confidence, as if walking through his own garden. Angulimala emerged from his hiding place, brandishing his weapons and fixing the monk with a stare that had paralyzed countless victims. "Stop, monk!" he roared, his voice echoing through the trees like thunder. "Do you not know who I am? I am Angulimala, the terror of this forest. Turn back now if you value your life." But the monk continued walking at the same peaceful pace, neither quickening his steps nor showing the slightest sign of alarm. This unexpected response confused and enraged Angulimala. He began running toward the monk, his weapons raised and murder in his heart. Yet no matter how fast he ran, he could not seem to catch up with the slowly walking figure. After what felt like hours of futile pursuit, Angulimala finally stopped, gasping for breath and utterly bewildered. "Stop, monk," he called out again, his voice now carrying a note of desperation rather than threat. "Why won't you stop running from me?" The monk turned slowly, and for the first time, Angulimala saw his face. It was the Buddha himself, his countenance radiating such profound compassion that it seemed to illuminate the entire forest. When he spoke, his words carried a gentleness that penetrated even Angulimala's hardened heart. I have stopped, Angulimala. It is you who are still running. These simple words struck Angulimala like lightning. In Buddhist teaching, this moment represents the possibility of awakening that exists in every being, no matter how lost they may seem. The Buddha's response pointed to a profound truth, that while Angulimala's body had stopped moving, his mind was still running from his own pain, running from his true nature, running from the possibility of peace. What do you mean? Angulimala asked, his weapons lowering despite himself. For the first time in years, he found himself genuinely curious, rather than simply murderous. The Buddha's eyes held infinite patience as he explained, I have stopped running from suffering, stopped fleeing from truth, stopped trying to escape from the present moment. You, however, are still running from your own conscience, running from the possibility of redemption. Your feet may be still, but your heart races away from peace. In Zen Buddhism, this teaching illustrates the difference between outer stillness and inner stillness. Many people appear calm on the surface, while their minds remain in constant agitation. True stopping means finding rest, not just for the body, but for the restless mind that creates all suffering. The Buddha had achieved this complete stopping, while Angulimala remained trapped in the endless motion of craving and hatred. Something profound began to shift within Angulimala's consciousness. For the first time since his transformation into a killer, he truly saw himself as he had become. The finger necklace around his neck suddenly felt unbearably heavy. The weapons in his hands seemed foreign, as if they belonged to someone else. Most surprisingly, he felt tears beginning to flow down his cheeks, the first tears he had shed in years. Is it possible? Angulimala whispered, his voice breaking, for someone like me to stop running? Is there hope for one who has caused so much suffering? The Buddha's response embodied the essence of Buddhist compassion. Every being possesses Buddha nature, he said gently. No matter how deeply buried it may become under layers of anger, fear, and delusion, this pure essence can never be destroyed. What you call evil is simply confusion about your true nature. When the confusion clears, the light that was always there can shine again. This teaching reflects the Buddhist understanding that no one is fundamentally evil. What we call evil actions arise from ignorance of our interconnected nature. When beings truly understand that harming others only harms themselves, when they recognize their essential unity with all life, harmful actions naturally cease. Angulimala's transformation wasn't about becoming someone new, but about remembering who he had always been beneath the darkness. In that moment of recognition, Angulimala fell to his knees and removed the terrible necklace from around his neck. He cast aside his weapons and begged the Buddha to accept him as a disciple. The Buddha, seeing the genuine transformation in his heart, welcomed him with the same compassion he showed to all seekers. From that day forward, the man, once known as the terror of the forest, became one of the Buddha's most devoted followers. Angulimala's story reminds us that no one is beyond redemption. In our own lives, we may encounter people who seem irredeemably lost to anger, hatred, or destructive patterns. Buddhist wisdom teaches us to look beyond surface behaviors to the Buddha nature that exists in every being. Sometimes, the most profound transformations occur in those who seem most unlikely to change. The bowl that held nothing. There once lived a potter whose hands had shaped clay for more than 40 years, creating vessels of such exquisite beauty that people traveled from distant lands to purchase his work. His shelves overflowed with glazed bowls that caught light like captured rainbows, elegant vases that seemed to hold moonbeams, and delicate cups that made even plain water taste like nectar. Yet despite his mastery and success, the potter found himself yearning to create something that would honor the Buddha's upcoming visit to their village. He wanted to craft a gift so perfect that it would express his deepest devotion and gratitude. For weeks, the potter labored with unprecedented intensity. He mixed the finest clays, experimented with rare glazes, and fired piece after piece in his kiln. Each creation was more beautiful than the last, yet none satisfied his demanding heart. He created bowls adorned with intricate patterns that told stories of enlightenment, vases shaped like lotus blossoms opening to receive wisdom, and cups so delicate they seemed carved from crystallized air. But as the day of the Buddha's arrival drew near, the potter grew increasingly frustrated. Despite his technical perfection, something essential was missing from every piece he created. They were beautiful, certainly, but they felt somehow incomplete, as if they were trying too hard to impress, rather than simply being what they were. In his desperation to create the perfect offering, he had lost touch with the simple joy that had originally drawn him to his craft. On the morning of the Buddha's visit, the potter sat surrounded by dozens of rejected masterpieces. His hands were stained with clay, his eyes red from sleepless nights, and his heart heavy with disappointment. In a moment of complete surrender, he took a simple lump of clay and began to work without any plan or intention. His hands moved of their own accord, shaping the clay not according to any design, but simply allowing it to become what it wanted to be. What emerged was the simplest bowl he had ever made. It had no decorative patterns, no elaborate glazing, no clever proportions designed to catch the eye. It was just a bowl, round, functional, honest in its simplicity. Yet as the potter held it in his hands, he felt something he hadn't experienced during all his weeks of elaborate efforts. This humble vessel seemed to radiate a quiet dignity that all his ornate creations had lacked. When the Buddha arrived at the village center, crowds gathered with their carefully prepared offerings. Wealthy merchants presented silk and precious stones, scholars offered rare manuscripts, and artisans displayed their finest works. The potter approached hesitantly, his simple bowl feeling embarrassingly plain compared to the magnificent gifts surrounding them. Yet he had nothing else to offer, so he stepped forward with quiet humility. "Blessed teacher," the potter said softly, extending his humble creation, "I worked for weeks, trying to create something worthy of your presence. Nothing I made satisfied me until I stopped trying so hard. This simple bowl is all I have to offer. It holds nothing but my sincere gratitude for your teachings." The Buddha received the plain bowl with the same reverence he had shown to all the elaborate gifts. But instead of setting it aside, he held it up for everyone to see. "Look at this beautiful bowl," he said, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "Do you see its true nature?" The assembled villagers looked puzzled. Compared to the ornate offerings surrounding it, the potter's bowl seemed almost apologetically simple. What could the Buddha possibly find remarkable about such an ordinary object? "This bowl," the Buddha continued, "embodies one of the deepest truths of existence. Its value lies not in what it contains, but in its capacity to contain. A bowl's usefulness comes from its emptiness, not from its substance. The space within is what makes it functional. The absence is what gives it purpose." In Buddhist understanding, emptiness doesn't mean void or meaningless. Rather, it refers to the absence of fixed, separate existence. Just as a bowl's emptiness allows it to hold water, tea, or rice, our own emptiness of rigid self-concepts allows us to be filled with compassion, wisdom, and peace. The potter's simple bowl had become a perfect teacher, demonstrating this profound principle without saying a word. The Buddha continued his teaching, using the humble bowl as his guide. "See how this potter has created something that doesn't call attention to itself. Its beauty lies in its humility, its strength in its simplicity. It doesn't try to impress or overwhelm. Instead, it offers itself completely to whatever purpose it might serve." This teaching points to a fundamental Buddhist principle about the nature of true service. Like the empty bowl, we are most useful when we don't insist on being filled with our own importance. When we empty ourselves of ego, pride, and the need for recognition, we create space for wisdom and compassion to flow through us. The potter's weeks of elaborate effort had been motivated by his desire to create something impressive, but his simple bowl emerged from a mind that had let go of such ambitions. "Moreover," the Buddha said, running his fingers along the bowl's smooth rim, "notice how this vessel doesn't compete with what it contains. If you fill it with water, it doesn't try to be more important than the water. If you place rice within it, it doesn't overshadow the rice. Its purpose is fulfilled precisely by not asserting itself." The crowd began to understand the deeper lesson. In their daily lives, they often struggled to make themselves important, to stand out, to be noticed and appreciated. But the Buddha was pointing toward a different way of being, one where fulfillment came not from asserting the self, but from serving others without self-importance. Like the bowl, true satisfaction came from emptying oneself rather than filling oneself. The potter listened to these teachings with growing wonder. He realized that in his weeks of frustrated effort, he had been trying to put himself into his work, rather than getting himself out of the way. His ornate creations had been expressions of his skill and ego, while this simple bowl had emerged when he finally stopped trying to prove anything. It was beautiful precisely because it didn't try to be beautiful. From that day forward, the potter's approach to his craft transformed completely. He continued creating vessels of great beauty, but now they possessed a quality they had never had before, a selfless simplicity that made them perfect for their intended purpose. Like his first humble offering to the Buddha, they served without calling attention to themselves. In learning to create empty vessels, he had discovered how to empty himself of the very obstacles that had prevented his greatest work. The Buddha kept that simple bowl throughout his travels, using it daily for his meals. It became a silent teacher, reminding all who saw it that true beauty often lies in what isn't there rather than what is. Sometimes the most profound gifts are the simplest ones, offered not to impress but to serve. The serpent that poisoned itself. In a lush valley where streams sang gentle melodies and flowers bloomed in endless abundance, there lived a cobra whose reputation for wisdom and kindness had spread throughout the animal kingdom. This serpent was known not for striking fear into other creatures, but for offering protection to the vulnerable and counsel to the confused. Birds would seek his advice on navigation. Small mammals would ask for his help in disputes, and even humans would leave offerings near his dwelling, grateful for his peaceful presence. He had taken sacred vows of non-violence, promising never to harm another living being regardless of the circumstances. For many seasons, the cobra lived in perfect harmony with his surroundings. His days were spent in meditation beneath a flowering jasmine tree, his evenings in gentle conversation with forest visitors seeking guidance. The very sight of his graceful form moving through the grass brought comfort to other creatures rather than terror. He had transformed the natural fear associated with his species into respect and admiration through his consistent acts of compassion. But change arrived in the valley in the form of a group of village children who discovered the cobra's dwelling during their afternoon wanderings. At first, they observed him from a respectful distance, awed by stories their elders had told about the wise serpent. However, as days passed and they noticed his complete refusal to defend himself, their respect gradually transformed into something far more dangerous. They began to see his gentleness, not as strength, but as weakness to be exploited. What started as playful curiosity soon escalated into deliberate cruelty. The children would throw stones at the cobra, pull at his tail when he tried to rest, and disturb his meditation with loud noises and taunts. Each act of aggression grew bolder than the last, as they discovered that the serpent would simply retreat rather than retaliate. Their games became increasingly vicious, driven by the intoxicating power they felt over a creature that could have easily harmed them but chose not to. Day after day, the cobra endured this torment with patient acceptance. His body became scarred from the stones, his rest was constantly interrupted, and his peaceful existence turned into a daily ordeal of suffering. Yet he held firmly to his vows of non-violence, believing that any aggressive response would contradict the spiritual principles he had dedicated his life to following. He told himself that their cruelty was temporary, that eventually they would grow tired of their games and leave him in peace. but the children's behavior only worsened. Word spread among the village youth about the serpent who wouldn't fight back, and soon larger groups began visiting the valley, specifically to torment the defenseless creature. What had once been a sanctuary of peace became a playground for cruelty. The cobra's reputation for wisdom began to fade, replaced by whispers that he was simply a coward masquerading as a saint. One afternoon, when the cobra's suffering had reached its peak, the Buddha happened to be traveling through the valley. He came upon the serpent lying battered and exhausted beneath his jasmine tree, his once brilliant scales dulled by abuse, and his spirit clearly broken. The Buddha sat down beside the wounded creature with infinite compassion, sensing the profound confusion and pain that had replaced the cobra's former serenity. "Tell me, friend," the Buddha said gently, "what has brought you to this state?" The cobra related his story with a voice heavy with despair. "Blessed teacher, I took vows never to harm any living being, and I have kept those vows faithfully. Yet my commitment to non-violence has only invited more violence. The children torture me daily, and I do nothing to stop them. I begin to wonder if my path of peace was a mistake, if perhaps some beings only understand the language of force." The Buddha listened with complete attention, his eyes reflecting deep understanding of the cobra's dilemma. When the serpent finished his tale, the Buddha smiled with gentle wisdom. "My friend, you have confused non-violence with non-resistance. There is a profound difference between refusing to harm others and allowing others to harm you without limit. True compassion sometimes requires us to set clear boundaries, not only for our own well-being, but for the spiritual welfare of those who would do us harm." This teaching illuminates a crucial understanding in Buddhist practice. Non-violence, or ahimsa, doesn't mean becoming a passive victim of others' aggression. Rather, it means responding to harmful situations with wisdom rather than hatred, firmness rather than revenge. The cobra had allowed his interpretation of non-violence to become a form of enabling, actually encouraging the children's cruelty by removing all consequences for their actions. "But how can I set boundaries without violence?" the cobra asked, his confusion evident. "My very nature as a serpent means that any defense I offer might seriously harm them." The Buddha's response revealed the subtle art of skillful means. "You need not bite to protect yourself," he explained. "You can rise up to your full height, spread your hood, and hiss with authority. You can show them that while you choose not to harm them, you are perfectly capable of doing so. This display of strength serves both of you. It protects you from abuse, while teaching them that their actions have consequences." This wisdom points to the Buddhist understanding that true strength often lies in restraint rather than action. The cobra's power wasn't in his ability to strike, but in his conscious choice not to strike when he easily could. However, for this choice to be meaningful, others needed to understand that it was indeed a choice rather than helplessness. By clearly demonstrating his capability while choosing restraint, the cobra would be teaching a far more powerful lesson than either violence or passive acceptance could provide. The next day, when the children arrived for their usual torment, they found a very different serpent waiting for them. As they approached with their stones and taunts, the cobra rose to his full magnificent height, spread his hood wide, and released a hiss that resonated with unmistakable authority. His eyes blazed with fierce compassion as he held their gaze steadily. The children froze, suddenly remembering that they were face to face with one of nature's most powerful predators. But the cobra did not strike. After holding his position long enough to make his point clear, he slowly lowered himself and resumed his peaceful posture. The message was unmistakable. I could harm you easily, but I choose not to. However, I will no longer allow you to harm me without consequence. The children retreated, their games suddenly seeming far less amusing when faced with real power consciously restrained. From that day forward, the cobra's dwelling became peaceful once again. The children learned to approach him with the respect his wisdom deserved, and he resumed his role as a teacher and protector in the valley. He had discovered that true non-violence sometimes requires the courage to appear dangerous while choosing to remain harmless. In learning to set boundaries with compassionate firmness, he had found a deeper understanding of what it truly means to serve others' highest good. The water that refused to flow. High in the Himalayan peaks, where snow-crowned mountains touched the eternal sky, a crystal-clear stream had carved its path through ancient stones for thousands of years. This wasn't an ordinary waterway. It flowed with such pure intention that monks would travel for weeks just to drink from its sacred waters. The stream understood its purpose completely, to give life wherever it went, nourishing everything in its path, without asking for anything in return. Yet one day, this generous spirit would face a crisis that challenged its very understanding of service. As the stream flowed down the mountainside, it encountered a small village nestled in a valley where people had lived in harmony with nature for generations. The villagers had built their homes around the stream's natural course, creating gardens that bloomed magnificently thanks to the life-giving water. Children played along its banks, women washed clothes in its gentle current, and farmers channeled its flow to irrigate their fields. The stream felt deep satisfaction watching the prosperity and joy its presence brought to these hard-working people. But as seasons passed, the villagers began to take the stream's generosity for granted. They built larger and more elaborate channels to divert its water, caring little about how this affected the stream's natural flow. They dumped waste into its banks, polluted its clean waters with soap and refuse, and showed no gratitude for the abundance it provided. Where once there had been respectful cooperation, now there was thoughtless exploitation. The stream watched with growing sadness as its pure waters became cloudy and its banks littered with debris. Fish began to die in its poisoned currents, and the beautiful plants along its edges withered from contamination. Yet still the villagers demanded more water for their expanding farms and growing population, never considering the cost of their carelessness. The stream's generous heart began to ache, with a pain it had never experienced before. One morning, as the stream witnessed a particularly thoughtless act, a villager dumping kitchen waste directly into its flow while simultaneously drawing clean water for his family, something inside the water's consciousness snapped. "Enough," the stream declared, its voice echoing through the valley like thunder. "I have given and given until I am poisoned and polluted. If this is how my generosity is received, then I shall give no more." In its hurt and anger, the stream made a fateful decision. It would redirect its flow away from the village entirely, finding a new path that avoided human contact altogether. The water began carving a different channel through the mountains, abandoning the valley where it had flowed for millennia. "Let them find water elsewhere," the stream thought bitterly. "I will no longer waste my purity on those who appreciate nothing." Within days, the effects of the stream's departure became catastrophic. Gardens withered under the merciless sun, wells ran dry, and the villagers faced the terrifying prospect of drought. Panic spread through the community as they realized what their carelessness had cost them. But by then, it seemed too late. The stream was gone, and no amount of regret could call it back. High in the mountains, far from human settlement, the stream initially felt vindicated in its decision. Its waters ran clear again, unpolluted by human waste. No one made demands on its generosity or took its gifts for granted. Yet as days passed in this pristine solitude, an unexpected emptiness began to grow within the stream's consciousness. It was during this time of isolation that the Buddha, traveling through the high mountain passes, encountered the displaced stream. He sat beside its banks in quiet meditation, sensing the water's inner turmoil despite its outward purity. When he finally spoke, his words carried the gentle wisdom of one who understood the deepest currents of the heart. "Beautiful stream, why do you flow here in the wilderness when your true calling lies in the valley below?" The stream poured out its story to the compassionate teacher, describing the villagers' ingratitude and the pollution they had brought to its sacred waters. "I gave them everything," the stream said, its voice heavy with hurt, "and they repaid my generosity with carelessness and contamination. Why should I continue to serve those who show no respect for my gifts?" The Buddha listened with infinite patience, understanding the stream's pain while seeing the deeper truth that anger had obscured. "Tell me," he said gently, "when you flowed through the village, were there no children who delighted in your coolness on hot days? Were there no flowers that bloomed more beautifully because of your nourishment? Were there no moments of joy and life that existed because of your presence?" The stream paused, remembering scenes it had forgotten in its anger. Yes, there had been children's laughter echoing from its banks, elderly villagers finding peace in the sound of its flow, and countless moments of simple beauty that its presence had made possible. In focusing on the pollution and ingratitude, it had lost sight of the genuine good it had accomplished. "But what about the waste and disrespect?" the stream asked. "How can I continue to give when my gifts are treated so carelessly?" The Buddha's response revealed the heart of compassionate wisdom. "True generosity doesn't depend on the worthiness of the recipient," he explained. "When you made your giving conditional on gratitude and respect, you transformed a pure act of service into a transaction. Your nature is to flow and nourish, not because others deserve it, but because that is what streams do." This teaching illuminated a profound truth about the nature of selfless service. In Buddhist understanding, genuine compassion arises not from the merit of those we help, but from the recognition of our interconnected nature. When we give with expectations or conditions, we create suffering for ourselves when those expectations aren't met. But when we give simply because giving is our nature, we remain free regardless of how our gifts are received. Moreover, the Buddha continued, by withdrawing your waters, you punish not only those who were careless, but also the innocent children, the grateful elders, and the countless creatures who depend on your flow. Your anger has made you withhold your gifts from those who truly appreciate them. Is this the justice you sought? The stream felt a deep shift in its understanding. Its withdrawal had indeed caused suffering for many who had never shown it disrespect. In trying to teach the ungrateful a lesson, it had abandoned its fundamental purpose. True wisdom lay not in withholding its gifts, but in giving them freely, while remaining unattached to how they were received. That very day, the stream began its journey back to the valley, but it returned with a transformed understanding of its role. It would flow and nourish as before, but now it gave without expectation, served without resentment, and maintained its purity not by avoiding contamination, but by continually renewing itself. The villagers, having learned from their near disaster, welcomed the stream's return with genuine gratitude and newfound respect. From that day forward, the stream flowed with even greater joy than before. It had learned that true fulfillment comes not from conditional giving, but from expressing one's nature freely and fully. In discovering the difference between service and transaction, it had found the secret of inexhaustible generosity. The question that had no answer. In a prosperous monastery, where knowledge was treasured above gold, there lived a scholar monk whose intellectual prowess had earned him admiration throughout the region. His name was Malunkyaputta, and his mind worked like a perfectly crafted instrument, dissecting every teaching and analyzing every concept with razor-sharp precision. He had memorized thousands of sutras, debated with the greatest minds of his time, and could recite complex philosophical arguments with flawless accuracy. Yet despite all his accumulated knowledge, a growing restlessness gnawed at his heart like a persistent hunger that no amount of learning could satisfy. Malunkyapputta's frustration centered on what he considered fundamental gaps in the Buddha's teachings. The master spoke beautifully about suffering and its cessation, about compassion and wisdom, but he seemed to avoid certain cosmic questions that any serious spiritual seeker should want answered. Where did the universe come from? What happens to enlightened beings after death? Is the soul eternal, or does it perish with the body? These weren't mere intellectual curiosities. To Malunkyaputta, they represented the very foundation upon which any meaningful spiritual practice should rest. For months, the scholar monk wrestled with these unanswered questions, finding them increasingly impossible to ignore. They haunted his meditations, disrupted his studies, and filled his dreams with cosmic puzzles that demanded solution. How could he follow a teacher who refused to address the most basic questions about existence itself? Finally, his frustration reached a breaking point, and he decided to confront the Buddha directly with an ultimatum that would force a resolution. One afternoon, as golden sunlight filtered through the monastery's ancient trees, Malunkyaputta approached the Buddha with determined steps and a mind full of carefully prepared arguments. His fellow monks sensed the tension in his bearing and gathered quietly to witness what promised to be a significant confrontation between intellectual ambition and spiritual wisdom. The scholar monk bowed respectfully, but formally, his gesture carrying more challenge than reverence. "Blessed teacher," Malunkyaputta began, his voice steady but edged with frustration, "I have followed your teachings faithfully for years, yet there are fundamental questions you have never answered. I cannot continue this path of practice while such essential matters remain unresolved. Today, I demand clear answers, or I will leave this monastery forever. Tell me, is the universe eternal or finite? Does the soul survive death or perish with the body? Are space and time infinite or bounded? These are not trivial matters. They are the very foundation of understanding reality itself." The Buddha listened to this challenge with perfect calm, his eyes reflecting neither surprise nor displeasure at the monk's ultimatum. When Malunkyaputta finished his passionate demand, the teacher sat in thoughtful silence for several moments, as if considering not just the questions themselves, but the deep need that drove them. Then, instead of answering directly, the Buddha began to tell a story that would forever change the scholar monk's understanding of what questions truly matter. "Malunkyaputta," the Buddha said gently, "imagine a man walking through a forest when suddenly he is struck by a poisoned arrow. The arrow pierces deep into his chest, and deadly poison begins coursing through his veins. His friends rush him to a skilled physician who can save his life by removing the arrow and treating the wound. But as the doctor prepares to help him, the wounded man cries out, 'Wait, I refuse treatment until you answer my questions.'" The Buddha's voice took on a tone of gentle urgency as he continued the parable. The dying man demands to know, what kind of wood was this arrow made from? Who crafted the arrowhead? From which direction was it shot? What was the archer's caste and family background? Was the bowstring made of hemp or sinew? What feathers fletched the arrow's shaft? I will not allow you to remove this arrow until you provide complete answers to all these questions. Malunkyaputta began to see where this teaching was leading, but the Buddha wasn't finished. "Tell me, learned monk, what would happen to this man while he insisted on having his intellectual curiosities satisfied before accepting treatment for his life-threatening condition?" "He would die," Malunkyaputta replied softly, the implications beginning to dawn on him. "He would die while demanding answers to questions that have no bearing on his immediate need for healing." "Exactly," the Buddha confirmed with compassionate firmness. "And this, my friend, is precisely your situation. You are struck by the arrow of suffering, the pain of birth, aging, sickness, death, and the constant dissatisfaction that pervades unenlightened existence. I offer you the medicine of the Dharma, the means to remove this arrow and heal the wound of suffering. Yet you refuse this healing, while demanding answers to questions that will not reduce your pain by even the smallest measure." The Buddha's teaching revealed the profound difference between intellectual curiosity and spiritual urgency. In Buddhist understanding, certain questions lead toward liberation while others lead only to endless speculation. The nature of ultimate reality may be fascinating to contemplate, but such contemplation doesn't reduce the immediate suffering that every being experiences. Wisdom lies in distinguishing between what must be known and what merely satisfies the mind's restless desire for information. Consider, the Buddha continued, whether knowing the origin of the universe would help you overcome anger when someone insults you. Would understanding the precise nature of consciousness after death reduce your fear when facing illness? Would cosmic knowledge eliminate the jealousy you feel when others succeed while you struggle? These abstract answers cannot heal the concrete wounds that cause your daily suffering. Malankaputta felt something shifting deep within his understanding. For years, he had pursued knowledge as an end in itself, assuming that more information would naturally lead to greater wisdom. But now he began to see that wisdom wasn't about accumulating answers to every possible question. True wisdom meant recognizing which questions actually mattered for the task of liberation. The teachings I offer, the Buddha explained, are specifically designed to address the arrow of suffering that pierces every human heart. I teach about the nature of suffering because understanding it helps you recognize your condition. I teach about the cause of suffering because knowing it helps you stop creating more pain. I teach about the possibility of suffering's end because hope motivates effort. And I teach the path to that end because practical steps lead to actual freedom. This teaching illuminated what Buddhists call the principle of skillful means. A true teacher doesn't answer every question that might be asked, but focuses on the questions whose answers lead to genuine benefit. Like a physician who treats the disease rather than satisfying curiosity about its historical origins, spiritual guidance addresses present suffering rather than abstract speculation. The Buddha's apparent silence on cosmic questions wasn't ignorance or evasion. It was compassionate focus on what truly helps. From that day forward, Malankaputta approached his spiritual practice with completely transformed priorities. Instead of demanding answers to unanswerable questions, he focused on applying the teachings that directly addressed his suffering. He discovered that, as his actual pain decreased through practice, his desperate need for cosmic explanations naturally faded. In learning to distinguish between helpful knowledge and mere intellectual entertainment, he found a peace that no amount of abstract information could have provided. The scholar monk's transformation became a teaching in itself for the other monks. They learned that the path to wisdom sometimes requires setting aside the very questions that seem most important. True intelligence isn't measured by how many mysteries we can solve, but by how effectively we address the suffering that actually affects our daily lives. The shadow that became light. In the heart of a sprawling city where merchants hawked their wares and crowds surged through narrow streets like restless rivers, there lived a man whose presence seemed to dim whatever room he entered. Devadatta was Buddha's own cousin, blessed with intelligence, charisma, and natural leadership abilities that should have made him beloved by all who knew him. Yet wherever the Buddha's light shone brightest, Devadatta's shadow grew darkest, consumed by a jealousy so profound it poisoned every aspect of his existence. This is the story of how the deepest darkness can sometimes give birth to the most unexpected illumination. From childhood, Devadatta had lived in the shadow of his extraordinary cousin. When they were boys, Buddha's wisdom and kindness drew people naturally to him, while Devadatta's attempts to gain attention often fell flat. As young men, Buddha's spiritual seeking inspired reverence, while Devadatta's ambitions seemed somehow hollow by comparison. Now, as adults, Buddha had become the awakened teacher whose name was spoken with reverence across kingdoms, while Devadatta remained merely the Buddha's cousin, forever defined by someone else's greatness. The poison of comparison had worked its way so deeply into Devadatta's heart that he could no longer experience joy in his cousin's success. Every story of Buddha's compassion felt like a personal rejection, every tale of his wisdom like a judgment on Devadatta's own inadequacy. Where others saw inspiration, Devadatta saw only evidence of his own failure to achieve similar recognition. His mind became a workshop where resentment forged increasingly elaborate plans for undermining the very person he had once loved. The breaking point came when Devadatta witnessed thousands of people gathering to hear Buddha teach in the city square. The crowd's rapt attention, their tears of gratitude, their obvious transformation through Buddha's words, all of this should have filled a cousin's heart with pride. Instead, Devadatta felt only burning humiliation that someone so similar to himself could command such devotion while he remained invisible. That night, his jealousy crystallized into a plan so audacious it shocked even his own corrupted conscience. Devadatta decided to assassinate the Buddha, not in secret, but publicly, dramatically, in a way that would demonstrate his power over the man everyone considered untouchable. He hired a group of archers and positioned them along a route where Buddha regularly walked in meditation. The plan was simple. As Buddha passed, the archers would loose their arrows, and Devadatta would emerge as the one who had ended the so-called enlightened master's influence forever. The fateful morning arrived with deceptive tranquility. Buddha walked his usual path, moving with the serene awareness that had become his signature, completely unaware of the deadly trap awaiting him. Devadatta crouched behind a stone wall with his hired killers, his heart pounding with anticipation and terror. As Buddha approached the designated spot, Devadatta gave the signal, and a volley of arrows flew through the morning air with lethal precision. What happened next defied all expectation and changed the course of both men's destinies. Instead of finding their target, the arrows seemed to curve away from Buddha's form, falling harmlessly to the ground around him. Buddha continued walking, apparently unaware that any attack had been attempted. But as he passed Devadatta's hiding place, he stopped and turned directly toward his cousin's position, his eyes holding not anger or fear, but infinite sadness and love. Devadatta, Buddha called gently, his voice carrying clearly across the distance between them. I know you are there. I know what you have tried to do, but I also know the pain that drives these actions. Come out, cousin. Let us speak as family once again. Devadatta emerged from his hiding place, like a man walking in a nightmare. His carefully planned assassination had failed completely. His hired archers had fled in terror, and now he stood exposed before the very person he had tried to kill. Every emotion crashed through him at once: shame, rage, confusion, and beneath it all, a grief so profound he could barely stand. He expected condemnation, punishment, perhaps even retaliation, but Buddha's response shattered every assumption he had made about justice and revenge. Buddha approached his cousin with arms extended, not in defense but in invitation for an embrace. "My dear Devadatta," he said, his voice breaking with genuine sorrow, "how much you must be suffering to attempt such an action. I see the pain behind your anger, the fear beneath your hatred. You have not become my enemy. You have become lost in your own darkness." This moment illuminates a profound Buddhist teaching about the nature of evil and redemption. In traditional understanding, harmful actions arise not from inherent wickedness, but from deep confusion about our true nature. When beings act from jealousy, hatred, or fear, they are expressing their disconnection from the love and wisdom that exist naturally within all consciousness. Buddha's response to Devadatta's attack demonstrated that even the most harmful actions can become opportunities for awakening compassion. Devadatta collapsed to his knees, overwhelmed by the contrast between his own darkness and his cousin's radiant forgiveness. For the first time in years, he saw clearly how jealousy had twisted his perception, turning every blessing in his life into a source of bitterness. "How can you forgive what I have done?" he whispered. "How can you show love to someone who just tried to destroy you?" Buddha's answer revealed the heart of Buddhist compassion. "Because I see that you are not your worst actions," he replied. "You are not your jealousy, your hatred, or your confusion. These are clouds that have covered your essential nature, but they are not who you truly are. Just as the sun continues shining, even when hidden by storms, your Buddha nature remains perfect beneath all this suffering." This teaching points to the Buddhist understanding that no being is fundamentally evil. What we call evil actions are expressions of ignorance about our interconnected nature. When someone truly understands that harming others only harms themselves, when they recognize their essential unity with all life, destructive impulses naturally dissolve. Devadatta's transformation began not with punishment, but with recognition of his inherent wholeness. In the days that followed, Devadatta underwent a profound transformation. The very intensity that had fueled his jealousy now powered his dedication to understanding and healing. He became one of Buddha's most devoted students, his former darkness serving as compost for unprecedented spiritual growth. His story became a teaching in itself, proof that the deepest shadows often contain the seeds of the brightest light. Years later, when Devadatta had become known for his wisdom and compassion, people would ask him about his transformation. "How did you change so completely?" they wondered. His answer always pointed to that moment when Buddha chose love over judgment. "I learned that we become what we are seen as." When someone sees the Buddha in you, even when you cannot see it yourself, that recognition calls forth what was always there, waiting to be discovered. the last teaching. As the full moon cast silver light across the Sala Grove, where Buddha lay upon his final bed, disciples gathered from every corner of the known world to receive what they sensed would be their master's last teaching. For 45 years, he had shared wisdom that had transformed countless lives, but now his earthly body was preparing for its final transition. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, as if all of creation was pausing to honor this moment of profound passage. Yet what would unfold in these final hours would prove more powerful than any teaching Buddha had ever given. Among the gathered disciples was Ananda, Buddha's faithful attendant for over 20 years, whose heart was breaking with the approaching loss. Tears flowed freely down his cheeks as he knelt beside the simple bed where his beloved teacher rested. "Master," Ananda whispered, his voice trembling with grief, "how can we continue without your guidance? Who will teach us when you are gone? What final wisdom can you share to sustain us through the darkness of your absence?" Buddha's eyes, though weakened by his body's decline, still sparkled with the gentle humor that had always characterized his teaching. He looked at the hundreds of devoted faces surrounding him, monks and nuns, lay people, and nobles, all united in their love for the Dharma he had shared. "My dear friends," he said, his voice soft but clear, "you ask for my final teaching, as if I have been withholding some secret wisdom for this moment. But the truth is, I have already given you everything you need." A murmur of confusion rippled through the assembly. How could this be their master's final teaching? Where was the profound revelation, the ultimate secret, the capstone wisdom that would complete their understanding? Sensing their bewilderment, Buddha smiled with infinite tenderness. "Listen carefully," he continued, "for this may be the most important thing you will ever hear. I am not your teacher. I have never been your teacher. You are your own teacher, and you always have been." The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the gentle rustling of leaves in the evening breeze. Many disciples looked stunned, as if the foundation of their spiritual understanding had suddenly shifted beneath their feet. How could Buddha, the enlightened one whose every word they had treasured, claim that he was not their teacher? Buddha's voice grew stronger as he continued his final lesson. "For 45 years, I have done nothing but point at the moon of truth that shines within each of you. Some of you became so fascinated by my finger that you forgot to look at the moon itself. Others worshipped the finger instead of recognizing the celestial beauty it indicated. But the wise among you understood that my words were merely echoes of the wisdom you already possessed." This teaching strikes at the heart of Buddhist understanding about the nature of enlightenment. Truth cannot be given from one person to another like a physical object. It can only be recognized, uncovered, and awakened within each individual consciousness. A teacher's role is not to pour wisdom into empty vessels, but to create conditions where students discover their own inherent completeness. "When I spoke of suffering," Buddha continued, "whose suffering was I describing? When I taught about compassion, whose heart needed to open? When I pointed toward liberation, who needed to be free? Every teaching was about you, by you, and for you. I was simply the mirror that reflected back your own deepest knowing. Young Rahula, Buddha's son, spoke up with tears in his voice. But Father, without your guidance, how will we know if we are on the right path? How will we distinguish between true wisdom and mere opinion? Buddha's response illuminated the essence of spiritual maturity. My son, the same awareness that recognizes truth in my words is the awareness that can recognize truth anywhere. It is not different from your own Buddha nature. When you stop looking outside yourself for validation and start trusting the wisdom that guided you to spiritual seeking in the first place, you become your own perfect teacher. This has always been the goal, not to create followers, but to awaken Buddhas. The teaching continued as Buddha's breathing grew more labored, but his clarity remained perfect. Some of you will want to make statues of me, build temples in my honor, and turn my words into rigid doctrines. Others will argue about the correct interpretation of my teachings and create elaborate hierarchies of spiritual authority. But remember this moment, when I tell you that the truth needs no temples, the Dharma requires no priests, and enlightenment recognizes no external authority. This profound teaching points to the Buddhist principle of spiritual independence. While teachers, communities, and practices can provide invaluable support, ultimate liberation comes from recognizing our own essential nature. Any teaching that increases dependence, rather than fostering independence, has missed the fundamental point. The goal is not to create eternal students, but to awaken inherent wisdom that needs no external confirmation. As the night deepened and Buddha's final moments approached, he offered one last gift to his devoted followers. When I am gone, do not mourn the loss of your teacher. Instead, celebrate the discovery of who you have always been. Every question you brought to me arose from your own wisdom. Every insight you gained through my teachings was your own recognition of truth. I was never separate from you. I was simply you, wearing different robes. The assembled disciples felt something extraordinary occurring. Instead of feeling abandoned by their teacher's departure, they began to sense a profound empowerment. The wisdom they had attributed to Buddha's special enlightenment, they now recognized as their own birthright. The peace they had sought in his presence, they discovered was available in their own awareness. My final teaching is this, Buddha whispered as his eyes began to close. Be lamps unto yourselves. Trust the light that has always been shining within you. When you need guidance, look not to my words, but to your own deepest understanding. When you face difficulties, remember that the same awareness that appreciated my teachings is perfectly capable of navigating any challenge. As Buddha's breathing became imperceptible and his physical form grew still, something miraculous happened among his disciples. Instead of feeling lost and directionless, they felt more connected to their teacher than ever before. They realized that he had not left them. He had shown them where he had always been. In recognizing their own Buddha nature, they discovered that the teacher and student were, and had always been, one. The greatest teaching is the one that makes itself unnecessary. In his final moments, Buddha gave his students the ultimate gift, not more dependence, but complete freedom. He showed them that the wisdom they had been seeking outside themselves had been their own treasure all along. As our journey through these timeless teachings draws to a close, you've discovered something precious. Each story has revealed the same beautiful truth, that wisdom, peace, and happiness were never outside you, waiting to be found. They were always here, in your own awareness, in your own heart. Whether you've listened actively or drifted into peaceful sleep, these ancient seeds of understanding will continue to grow within you. In the days ahead, you may find yourself remembering the farmer's ox, the empty bowl, or Buddha's final teaching at just the right moment. Trust these moments of recognition. Thank you for joining us at Moon Mind Temple. May you carry this peace wherever you go, knowing that the greatest treasure is the one you've always possessed. Rest well, dear friend.